Who's our host?
Here we are.
We all are, basically.
Good evening, everyone. We
Good evening.
We got a bit of an unusual layout. Sorry, it might look a little sloppy on the sidebar there, but you know, since we've got people joining from all over the world in all kinds of time zones, we don't know who might be dropping in and dropping out. So I just made the layout so that it'll fit everyone in, no matter how many people we've got. But yeah, our merch guy, Ariel, who, you know, you can find the links to our merch in this every stream description. It just seems like he's got all kinds of connections. And he said, like, hey, I think I could help you guys organize a stream with, you know, some of the original guys from Argonaut software, Argonaut Games, I think is the proper name of the company. And we could play the unreleased remaster of Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, or Gobbos. I'm not actually sure which way to sound. Maybe some of the guys can correct me on that. But obviously we've got Corey at the top, of course. But going down from Corey, would everyone like to introduce themselves and say what your history with Argonaut and Croc is?
I guess that's me next. Hey, I'm Jez. I am in London right now. And I started Argonaut in 1982.
Wow.
So yes, I am that old.
Well, you don't look it.
Okay, thank you. And Croc was the first big game that Argonaut built that was original, that had original IP. And we put a lot of love and effort and spent a lot on it, and it brings back a lot of memories. And my best hire was John, who you're about to hear from next. As
Hi, everybody. John Edelson. I was brought into Argonaut in 1996, and the company was an amazing place, all sorts of talent, rich history, fantastic contacts and people. They'd grown a little big, a little fast. And so I was there keeping it organized. And pretty quickly I focused in on Croc as, wow, this is a huge opportunity. And I ended up not just being the executive producer, but often being the actual producer, just me and the team. And it was a very exciting time. The team was unbelievably excited. There were so many ideas. It was a brand new frontier to get a free roaming 3D game out on the PlayStation. So many possibilities, which ones to choose, how to keep it on schedule. And that's what I lived through for a year, and it's great to look back on it. Scott?
Hello, I'm Scott Butler. I was the lead artist on Croc. I don't remember exactly when I joined Argonaut. I know it was 90 or 91. It was a bit hazy. I was a teenager. I was very young. But it was around that time. I know I was with the company about 7 years. We worked on a lot of games, a lot of fantastic games, and Croc was one of them. It was an incredible experience, a lot of new discovery for us, doing a very large sort of 3D game with, platforming and, colorful characters and concepts and designs. And it was quite different from the stuff I've been working on, before that. So it was a really great experience. I've never forgotten it. It was really amazing, very creative.
Now, where exactly was Argonaut located back at that time? Because, when I think of British game development, my mind goes to Rare, who were I think literally making games out of a farmhouse. And I'm sure that was not the norm.
Well, we didn't have a farmhouse because we were in London, but Argonaut started in my bedroom. Then it moved to my first house and it took over my house. And then it moved to a warehouse in Colindale, where I think Croc did start in that warehouse. And then we moved to actually some pretty swish offices.
Nice.
that were professional. and that was in Edgware, which is kind of on the edge of London, and that was actually a pretty decent office.
Nice. Well, I mean, you guys were definitely on kind of the forefront of pushing, you know, especially like 3D technology at a time where people were still figuring it out. I mean, when you started working on Croc, I think like there was no template for like how, there was no like standardization of like, here's best practices for like how you move a third person perspective character in a 3D space and jump around and all that kind of stuff. Like when you started making this game, you know, I don't think games like Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot, and I'm not sure about Tomb Raider. Like, I don't know if that stuff really existed quite yet when you started working on this.
No, we were early, and particularly with 3D technology, we were, you know, very early. We were doing, I mean, I was doing 3D in 1982. So that was my thing at the time.
Nice.
And so Argonaut did a lot of 3D technology, and that's what we were good at. In some ways, we were, you know, for a long time better at the technology than at the creativity, and that was something that we learned along the way. And Croc was the first game where we were as creative as we were with the technology too.
Nice. So I went to the graphics menu here. What I really like about what I've tried of this so far is it's really faithful to the original. You know, I think there's a lot of value in kind of a soft touch to remastering, I think, in that you don't want to destroy the integrity or intent of the original game. And you know, so there's like an overall toggle at the top here where you can choose like retro, remastered, or do some custom mixtures of the things.
Yeah, which I think is a really neat feature, is that you can have, you know, like remastered character models, but have the classic textures.
Yeah, I mean the approach here, I don't actually know what the underlying technology of how this remaster is built, but it kind of makes me think of similar results to stuff like the N64 decompilation projects, where it's really this new foundation built on original assets, which I really like. I really like that dedication to keeping the original stuff there. But, you know, then the remastered stuff adds additional, you know, triangles to all of the environments and characters, as well as, you know, upscaled textures and some enhanced lighting. But then what I really like is the option to mix and match them. So like this was the preset I made. Like if I were like to be sitting down, like playing through the whole game, this is probably how I would choose to do it, because I think this is maybe, this background here is maybe not the best scene for showing it, but it kind of gives the character models like it's a bit closer to that like CGI ideal that was kind of developed at the time. Like, you know, I've got the original manual here, you know, the art that's on the cover there. But everything is still built with like the same disparate like body parts, just like the original. So I just like that it embraces the original for what it is and doesn't try to pretend it's something that it's not, like a lot of remasters do. There's also, this is probably going to look really bad on the stream just because of the way it scales, but the CRT filter is good too. It's it's very PVM like.
Has a nice,
very similar to like you know, if people in our audience are familiar with like the results on like the Ultra HDMI. I felt like that was like kind of the gold standard CRT effect among like retro hardware mods for a long time. So yeah, pretty darn good. So what I want to do, getting into the game at first, I want to turn on the retro, and I'll show you why. So let's start. So the world map, I'm going to try to do this really briefly here. I'm far away from my monitor, so hopefully I don't screw up here in clicking the right things. But I booted up the PS1 version last night and took a couple of quick screenshots just because I thought it'd be fun to compare. And, like, you really can see that it's the original assets. And I think that dedication to authenticity is so admirable there. And if I hide that one there, yeah, so you can, it's pretty darned authentic, but you get higher resolution. You don't have the geometry snapping of the PS1, the texture warping, stuff like that. I even appreciate that.
It would be pretty hard to simulate that.
Yeah.
Make it look worse.
Your interpolation of the texture mapping of the PS1, there's no perspective in it.
Yeah.
It would be very difficult to try and emulate that.
I think I saw one like retro throwback game do that once before. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, it did something kind of similar. But yeah, it's not something you see people redo often.
It's certainly, yeah, that would, you'd really have to try hard to make it look like that.
So, and if you can pause the game and switch the graphics modes, but if you just press the select button, or what I call this, I'm playing with an Xbox controller. What I call the select button toggles between the graphics modes. So this takes you to the remaster. I actually really like how the the collectible objects are still like 2D objects, just like in the original, but just much higher resolution, And then if you press select once more, you can go to your custom option, which I think this is what I would choose personally.
No, that's how I played it earlier.
Yeah, I really like the unfiltered texture that gives it a nostalgic feel, while at the same time you're getting like the higher res character models and stuff like that, So it's I think it's kind of awesome. I mean, and stuff is like really nicely rounded, like this log here. You switch between the modes, so I'll probably switch between them a little bit as we play, but this is what I like. So anyway, enough of my ramblings. I mean, I'll go on and get ahead and start playing. I will say, though, I have played this before. I've not played far into it. I'm definitely going to play the most Croc I've ever played in my life tonight. I brought both of the PS1 games down here, just in case we wanted to look at them. They're games that really, like all of the platformers on PS1, are games that are new to me. Because back in the day, I was like a hardcore Nintendo kid. And when I finally got a PlayStation, I'm like, well, I'm just buying this for RPGs, but I'm going to play platformers on, N64, And so I bypassed, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Ape Escape, and Croc. And, those are mistakes I've been trying to correct slowly over the years. So now the time has finally come for me to dedicate to Croc here.
So how big was the team that worked on the original? Like, how many people would you say it was? To anybody who would like to answer.
I was trying to remember that recently. I feel like it was, Jez, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it around like 15 or something?
I think it was more, wasn't it? Or
it was a core team of about 15, and then there were people who cycled in and out. So the core team were all sitting in a room. The audio people were separate. So there were four audio people that wouldn't account as core team. And then there was some use of 3D technology that wasn't core team. They used some of Brenda's stuff. And then there were different graphics people that were brought in for different things.
And I guess, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, it sounds about right, yeah.
And I mean, like most people know that, like this, I mean, that are fans of the game, know that it was built on basically what was a tech demo for a 3D Yoshi game. I mean, it's, as far as I know, like, is that
true?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of
or
those
can
things
it
that,
not be said?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's one of those things that has been like talked about, but I'm not sure if it's ever been completely said
So
if
we
that,
had a
that is 100%
relationship
true or not.
with Nintendo, which lasted more than 2 years, and we had a multi-year, multi-game deal with them, and also a technology deal where we taught them 3D.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, we did. That was our job. We held classes inside Nintendo.
That's
and
wild.
I gave some of the classes myself, and some of our tech team did as well. And several people ended up moving permanently to Japan.
Oh yeah,
who were Dylan, Giles, Krista.
He made the Mario face, right?
Yes. So after we had done our 3 games, or during the 3rd game, we and Star Fox was the first one, and Stunt Race was the second one, and Star Fox 2 was the 3rd one, which didn't come out. We had pitched them a Yoshi 3D racing game, which we had visualized, and it looked like a 3D Mario game. We pitched it to them, and they basically said, no, we're going to do games with our characters. No outside company is going to touch our characters. And we really wanted to do a 3D platform game, so we just had to start again. You know, we obviously we didn't use any of the assets, obviously, so it was, you know, it was an entirely new game, but it was like we had a dream of doing a 3D platform game, and Nintendo didn't want to do it. We wanted to do it ourselves, and so we started from scratch with an original IP, and that's Croc.
Well, it would have been a lot better than Yoshi's Story, that's for sure.
Well, we knew Nintendo was never going to let us use Mario, but we thought they might have let us use Yoshi. But
you know, they're doing all kinds of outsourcing today. Like, you know, the Princess Peach game that came out this year, that was handled by Goodfeel, which was a company made up of former Konami people.
So back then, Nintendo never worked with outside companies apart from on an exclusive basis, and Rare was the first, and Nintendo never worked with Rare. They only ever took Rare games. We were the first company, and possibly the only non-Japanese company, to actually work directly with them. We had team members inside Nintendo and team members back in London, and we worked hand in hand on those games. It was a good relationship for a while, and it ended after a while, and Croc was our baby after we finished that relationship.
It was probably nice to have that freedom to just make the exact game that you wanted to make.
Absolutely, and it was one of the reasons that we left the exclusive relationship with Nintendo, was because we wanted to do our own thing, and we wanted to be more creative and to do original ideas and so on. And that, and also we raised some investment, and that gave us the resources to be able to invest in our own IP, which we never had the money to do that before.
How involved have you been with this remaster?
Well, involved in that we've all been roped in to provide our memories and assets and anything that we have. I've been involved personally in that I invested in Argonaut Games Reborn. So right now it's mainly my funds that are providing the seed capital for it. But when Croc ships, then it should have cash flow, and then it can do more stuff.
Yeah, I know there's some people on our Discord channel like saying like, are they gonna do Buck Bumble?
There's a lot of demand for that.
There's
the song alone.
Imagine, like who knew that the soundtrack of Buck Bumble became a drum and bass record or something like
something like that, yeah.
Like decades after it was made.
Really?
Yeah. If you look at it on YouTube, you'll see there's like it's a thing. But Bumble actually got released as a single.
I mean, that game, I guess, kind of got that was kind of perhaps, I guess, in taking what you learned on Star Fox in some ways and like applying it to your own IP.
Yeah, like with the
We
flying.
did learn a lot working with Nintendo. Because we were primarily a tech company. We did the 3D tech. We did games that were all quite tech focused. And after working with Nintendo, we learned a lot more about how to be creative, how to make characters be central to the story, how to, focus on third-person visuals so that you can see what happens to your character while you're playing the game. Because we'd only ever done first-person games before then. So yeah, we got as much out of the relationship with Nintendo as they got out of it. They learned 3D, we learned to be creative.
As Chris Fratt says in the chat there, he says that the Buck Bumble original soundtrack was remastered by the composer recently. Probably using, like updated or uncompressed sound or sample files and stuff.
Sometimes that stuff sounds kind of weird though. Like,
yeah.
I think the uncompressed like GoldenEye samples came out a while back, and people like rebuilt the soundtracks. I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I heard so much, compressed by the system. Corey, do you want to catch up on any super chats that came before that? Before then, just so.
Yep.
Don't fall behind.
Some of super chats come in and with different questions and stuff from viewers. I've told the chat that we'll get to as many of them as I can. It's just I don't want to interrupt anybody. So I will read them when we have the opportunity. Our first one was from Cade the Squirrel with $10. Thank you. It says this is peak childhood right here. I first played it on PS1 as a Wii lass in 2000s, but I'm pretty partial to the Saturn version nowadays. I love its colored lighting and VDP2 effects, like the infinite cloud layer. Really underrated port IMO. So, I mean, I feel like the Saturn version, I've had people contact me and said, you got to talk to them a little bit about the Saturn version of Croc, because I think that most people tend to think of this as like mainly a PlayStation game. But, I'm not even sure how much, if they came out at the same time. Do any of you recall when the Saturn version came out as compared to the PS1 version? And,
I don't recall, but I assume the Saturn version came later.
Okay.
John, do you recall?
It was about 6 months later. It was originally contracted on the Saturn, so we tried to keep it current, but the focus was really on the PlayStation.
Yeah.
What's interesting, just talking about the timelines, this could be a later print potentially, but the back of the manual for Croc 1 says Croc 2 coming Christmas '98. So
that was
y'all were making these pretty close together on a tight schedule, I guess.
Well, we started Croc 2 straight after Croc 1, but things take longer than you expect, always.
Yeah, I mean, I just found out earlier today about the PS1 version of Alien Resurrection that you did, and that was several years after the movie came out. But that game is also credited for being the first-person shooter on consoles to use a modern style dual analog stick control scheme, which you would never expect that.
It only came out a week or two before Croc shipped, and
Wait, Alien Resurrection did?
No, sorry, the analog stick.
Oh yes, right. Okay.
Oh right. So
so we had to rush support at the last second into Croc, and that explains why the controls weren't very analog in Croc 1.
Well, if I recall from because I booed the original version just yesterday, and there was you still, I mean, it seems fairly similar to this version where you do have that walking slow and a speed up ramp. I mean, I think he's got a great sense of momentum, just to the way that when you go full tilt, like the way he leans forward is just.
Yeah.
He has a very satisfying walk cycle, I think.
Yes,
Or
and especially I
runs-
love how he leans forward
Yeah.
like that. You know, someone in our Discord
Very purposeful.
wanted to ask about, you know, what the animation systems were like with these early 3D games. Did you have because it's a friend of mine who works as an animator now. He says that they have a skeletal system, or are they using animated vertices like in the engine?
Animated version.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, the body of Croc and I believe the legs were all animated vertices, essentially like skinned vertices. But then the arms were all segmented pieces, weren't they? And the head was segmented, I think.
Yeah, and I just switched back to the retro graphics mode so you can see
And
that
the tooth is segmented.
a little more
Yes.
more easily.
Yeah, all the tools were built ourselves. There wasn't really anything around at the time. There was no Unity, no Unreal. Like it was our own technology. It was Brenda, which was the 3D library that we used, and Croc Ed was the editor, and almost all the Argonaut games after Croc also still used the Croc. They used Croc Ed. They used the Croc Strat language, the strategy language for all the motion and behavior of the characters. It was all built in house.
Speaking of the engine, I don't know how much you all might know since you weren't directly developing the remaster, but do you know, is it like based on like Unity or Godot or something like that, or is it?
Okay, well, don't shoot me because I don't know accurately, but this is based on the source code of the original Croc. It's actually based on the Croc PC source code, so we had access to that, but it has Unity underneath it. So it's the Croc engine doing all the graphics that it knows how to do, and then it's Unity displaying it. So it's not using Unity the way you would build a game today. It's using Unity as a 3D layer with mostly our own code doing everything.
That's so cool.
So Unity is just rendering it, right? You're just outputting the.
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, that's what it's doing.
And like I showed with that comparison earlier, I mean, the result is really authentic to just the lighting and color and geometry and the way that the textures map to all the surfaces. I mean, given that you guys were such pioneering 3D people, I could see it being very easy for some of the maybe sort of weird stuff you guys did, like kind of breaking in a port like this. So it's actually kind of amazing it's working. Because like I think a good example is like the Factor 5 guys. There are things that they did in some of their games. They were known for being tech wizards too. And a lot of that stuff is known famously to break an emulation. Super Turrican is a pretty famous example. Just doesn't work that well in a lot of situations.
Unlike the later SNES revisions, just like as a system.
I want to say, no, that was someone else. That wasn't Factor 5, but I really like these sheep, by the way. I love it. I just love how they animate.
They're very hungry.
I was just watching those. I'd almost forgotten about those guys.
I know. Well, like, I unfortunately, I wouldn't have this view quite on the PS1 version because I don't have a save on there. But like, it's so close to the edge. I wonder if they're cropped out when you're over this level on that version. I don't know.
Jez, do you remember a funny issue we had in development with the Saturn version where Croc's head would disappear sometimes because it didn't quite finish rendering the full frame? It's like, we have to fix that. I'll freak out the kids.
I definitely remember, the headless Croc,
It shipped with the headless Croc. I remember that.
Bug,
Limited edition.
I mean, InGen UK, who had a super chat, it's like also asking about the Saturn version, like how much harder was it to program for,
Well,
like what he says there is the head missing bug.
It shouldn't have been harder to develop for. It's just you're doing a port, and so if anything, you're trying to make it look as close to the PlayStation as possible, and that's the hard thing.
Yeah.
But the Saturn itself is a very good system, and more powerful than the PlayStation.
It was dual
Oh.
chips, wasn't it? Didn't they add a second chip in the Saturn to try to compete with the PlayStation? It was like 2 SH2s or something.
It was
like a second
definitely more
VDP?
powerful than the PlayStation at the time, but we had built the game for the PlayStation, and so the Saturn guys had to like try and make it as close as they could.
But the second one never came out on the Saturn, but it was supposed to. How far along did Croc 2 make it on the Saturn?
I think it's just a numbers game. Just with like the PlayStation 1 has sold really well, and don't think the Saturn was that successful.
Well, the Saturn was very successful in Japan. How did, because something that, I didn't show it when I was before I booted into the game, but there's like a whole, the Crocopedia, and there's a ton of interesting stuff in there.
Oh, okay.
Magazine covers, magazine articles. It has a Japanese TV commercial. I mean, it's really interesting. A lot of these like Western developed platform characters were often portrayed really differently, on their box arts in Japan. Do you all have any insight on bringing this game to Japan? Any changes or anything weird, or what kind of success did it have there? Do you know?
The Japanese publisher did send over some developers to help us get the color scheme and some of the feel to make it feel right in Japan, and they helped make some changes.
Oh,
We
so
did- yeah,
the
we had-
actual
we had a
the actual game
Japanese-
has
we
different
had a
colors?
Japanese consultant help us with making sure that it would be good in Japan. What was his name? Can you remember? Was it?
I can't remember his name. I do remember he introduced the little bird, and the bird was supposed to do a whole lot more. Ultimately, it was just there at the end of the level. But
Oh, Beanie.
Beanie, there's his name.
Beanie. That's what I call
Beanie
my
the
dog.
bird.
The little bird who takes Croc at the end of every level after you hit the
Oh,
gong.
right here, yeah.
It
He used
does
to
look
have-
very beanie. Like
He used to have more of a role, but
There he is.
the controls on it were never. It never really worked, so we cut it.
So, those were changes that you made to the game before it released in all regions. Those weren't just like changes specific to the Japanese version.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there was definitely an eye for having success in that market, before the game was released anywhere, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that Argonaut always did try to develop games for the world and try not to make them too, local to the UK. So we already had plenty of input from America, from Fox. So we needed input from Japan, and we got it.
For this remaster, you've brought in a whole bunch of original assets and stuff. I mean, where did all this stuff come from?
We were very lucky that a lot of the team members and even other Argonauts that were part of the research process to gather all these assets, they found stuff like 30 years old files. They found a lot of stuff. It was a treasure trove, and so not just the game assets, but the Crocopedia stuff, and like there's so much material there that different members of the team found after all these years.
It's really
amazing.
cool.
Turns out I still had the original high quality music on a CD. Why? I don't know. Still had it.
That's crazy. I mean, it's just you just never know how many people just game developers just have this stuff that they don't even know that they have, probably.
Well, Gary did a great job tracking down everyone involved in the team, and also not just on the team, but like tangential to the team, and tracked down so many people and badgered them all to get the historic assets and anything they had. You know, it was quite a task, and he was very focused on finding everything that we could find about Croc, because you know a lot of it could have easily disappeared.
Yeah.
Did you know, you were talking about music, did you all use like in-house composers back then, or did you?
Yeah, we did. We had a studio. We had several musicians. We had a pretty purpose-built studio with, you know, all the right equipment and the right software, and there were several in-house musicians that were full-time, and we did involve an outside producer as well to produce everything and get it to professional quality.
Yeah, it seemed like there was kind of this shift at some point, kind of maybe early 2000s, where it seemed like most companies had their own in-house musicians, and then it seemed like outside of maybe companies like Nintendo and some others, like it seemed like musicians kind of generally migrated to more of a freelancer kind of role.
I think musicians used to be freelance. Like in the early days of computer games, very few companies employed musicians in-house. It was all done freelance by specialist computer composers, computer music composers. And I think we were one of the first studios that had an in-house music department, especially for a developer that wasn't a publisher. But maybe, I mean, I haven't really followed how it's done now, but maybe music is far more conventional now, and so you just go to a music studio to do it, and you don't necessarily need an in-house studio.
Yeah, I mean, you're not really programming to the hardware like you used to, in terms of, you know, how does this even function? You know, you can use, you know, some people are using, you know, like those old Roland sound canvases and stuff to compose music on today, not because they have to, but because they want to, right? That's, you know, they're going for a nostalgic sound, but it's not like it's running on Roland hardware connected to your computer as the end user, the player, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it just, I think it's like is it OGG file? I think is the sound
That's
format.
what's used now. It's like the OGG Vorbis. I think that's like
OGG Vorbis is a lossless compression format.
And it's open source, right? Or is that FLAC?
Yeah.
It's open source.
Yeah. But no, I mean, nowadays you would just use, you know, a digital audio workstation and like Ableton, and you have plugins for everything. You can emulate any instrument. You can emulate every old instrument, like the Roland TR-808 or whatever. It's all just emulation now, and you can do anything now. Whereas back then, these were real instruments. You know, we had, you know, the recording rooms with the soundproof and the microphone with the fluffy baffle. Don't know what it's called.
Like a pop filter, or
yeah, the fluffy one.
So what I remember is Argonaut was way ahead of everybody else, or way off track from other game companies, in that we had a full audio department. And these were very talented people. There was Justin, Gwyn, and Karen.
Yeah.
And they would compose the music, they would play the music, they would do all the sound effects. And they had this really ambitious approach, just like the rest of the team, to the sound effects, and particularly the music on Croc.
Mm-hmm.
And they put it together, and everyone loved it, and it was perfect, and it was finished. And then they wandered into Jesmond's office and said, "Hey, we want to do it again." What? The music's finished. You know, we're getting ready to ship the game. And they're like, no, we got this great producer, and we're going to re-record it all, and we're going to use real analog trumpets, and I think the percussion they were doing with live instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, the hell you are. But they made a pretty strong case for it. it was going to sound really good. I can't remember the name of the producer they got. They got some big name music producer.
He was a a legit producer, yeah.
And so we opened all the music back up, redid it all from sort of scratch. And I was, of course, look, people are using these little tiny speakers, these little tiny TVs. Is it really worth it? I mean, we were way ahead of what kind of made commercial sense there. But the motivation, the team, and somehow the time we came up with, and that's how we produced that amazing soundtrack, which unfortunately didn't all ship in the original PlayStation. You couldn't compress it.
Mm-hmm.
The PC got the whole soundtrack.
Oh, okay.
In some way, that we had to cut some of it for the PlayStation to get it on the disc.
Dang. So the PC version is considered to be like the best version, I guess, until this releases. I assume. I mean, of those original batch, you'd say that the PC version is.
The PlayStation one was the big seller. That was the one that sold 3 million copies or whatever, or thereabouts. But yeah, the PC one, being more powerful, had the certain advantages.
Mm-hmm.
But the PC version was based on the PlayStation code, so it was a PC trying to emulate a PlayStation. The irony is that this version is now the PC version trying to emulate those old consoles.
Isn't that funny how that works? Just.
Well, that was the only
on
code
top
we
of this
could
original
find.
version.
We could only find the PC version source code, so this is the PC version with changes to make it look like the PlayStation.
So I keep sorry, Corey. I was just I thought you were done. I keep going through these gym doors where I've collected all the gems, and then I get to go to a different exit. Does that take me to a different level, or does it just take me to where there's just more collectibles within that same level? Or is it a different exit? If you remember.
Each island is made up of, I think, 8 levels and 2 boss levels.
Okay.
You only get to the boss level if you've collected all 6 colored gems.
Oh.
Do I have that right, Scott?
I don't remember. The last time I played Croc was literally a few months after it came out. So it's been a very long time.
This is nearly 30 years ago for us.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury of the version that you've got. You have that and we don't. We have not played this.
Yeah, I'm desperate to get my hands on this. It's funny because Gary was, producer was asking me so many questions about how we did this, how we did that. And he got to a point where he just always would put in parentheses, if you happen to remember. Because he got so used to me saying, I think this is right.
Is this
My kids beg me every few days, when are we going to get it to play Croc? When can I play it? When can I play it on my Switch? I'm desperate to get a copy of it, so you're very lucky.
Well, I'm playing on PC right now. Normally we prefer to stream on consoles just because it's kind of what we're set up to do. But
there is one inaccurate emulation here. When you get to another level, it doesn't take 30 seconds. I think we should put those delays in.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, you probably
as slow as the original.
That's funny.
Yeah, read accurate speeds. There was a super chat earlier from Shadow Mask who was asking, more about the development side. Did you use any original tools or assets like meshes, textures, or audio and video encoders?
All of the assets, as in the 3D models and textures, are from the original game.
Mm-hmm.
But they obviously have the ability to up-res them. So both done offline and in real time. That all of them, when you look at the high detail versions, they weren't the original ones. They're up-resed versions, but the models and textures and everything was the original assets.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what the process would have been like for enhancing the number of triangles on all of this stuff.
They did a lot of tests, and the team did a great job, and that was actually one of the first things they did was experimenting with what Croc looked like when he was up-resed and how to get him to look kind of smooth and curved, and that was a lot of the work up front was how to up-res everything.
I mean,
and make it
the
look
geometry's
faithful, but still good.
Yeah, the geometry is like really high. But I just love that everything is, you know, it's still all rigged the same, you know, you know, all the pieces come together in the same way as the original, but it's just higher density triangles.
Yeah, it's very faithful, isn't it? It just feels the same. It feels the same. Yes, it has the same charm.
Feels the same, but just smoother and curvy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's got to feel good for you guys too, to like see that, you know, they didn't just throw all the old work out the window, right? Like it's based on your work.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No,
and these days, you never know with these kind of things, you know, because there's good remasters out there, and there's some there's some pretty bad ones, and ones that don't like respect the original at all.
Yeah.
And this one, like it strikes like a perfect balance of, you know, like updating it but keeping the options there for people who want it to look and feel like the original.
Yeah. And I'm just really loving this balance of like the high res or higher density geometry and the unfiltered textures like that.
Yeah, I love the unfiltered.
That just
too.
that I don't know if like the people marketing this game they probably want to see like this high res textures all the
with
time,
the lighting, the enhanced lighting and stuff.
I gotta say something about that unfiltered texture that just makes me happy looking at it.
Yeah, it makes me
I had a lot of people asking me like, are there going to be options to put back the old stuff and have options for everything? So I'm really glad there's so many options in there, because it basically everyone's going to have a different thing. I mean, I can imagine a lot of people like you, the way you're playing it, kind of switching back and forth, a little reminisce of this and then try out the new stuff and back and forth, you know.
Yeah, well,
I remember when we were first developing Croc, it was interesting because we were new with the PlayStation, and we sort of started with a much simpler, sort of more linear, smaller environment, and none of us were like quite aware of how powerful the PlayStation was. And I remember Tony and Lewis got a whole bunch of Crocs running on screen, and I was like, wow, this actually can push some stuff. This is pretty interesting. And it's sort of like I think it sort of informed the game design a bit, because we started experimenting with larger areas and more sort of connected, kind of a bit more of an not open world, but more of a larger world to explore. It was a really interesting time.
You did all the boss levels, right? You did all the bosses?
I did Croc himself, and I did the initial environment stuff because we were trying to figure out how to make sort of room arenas, corridors, you know, inverse corners, blending between different, you know, biodome kind of surfaces and stuff. So I was doing all that, and then all the textures, and then they continued, you know, all that was done by the rest of the team. But yeah, I did most of the boss stuff. I remember doing Flibby's Arena which were coming up, good timing. I remember doing Flibby's Arena quite vividly with the disco lighting, putting crazy lights in there, trying to make it all super colorful and fun. Yeah.
That blew me away the first time I saw it. I thought it was just amazing.
Yeah.
This arena.
It was funny because like we had done yeah, it's a good name, isn't it? We had done FX Spider before this, and FX Spider is all arenas, you know, because it's a fighting game. And the lead programmer always was getting angry with me because initially on PC and everything, we didn't have a whole lot of like polygon budget. So we were trying to do very, very simplistic arenas, you know, with sort of like mostly sort of 2D elements. And I was like, I think we can fit more 3D. I think we can do more. And he would go home at night, and I would just squeeze stuff in. And in the morning, he'd be mad at me because there was like extra geometry in there. But that whole sort of like, you know, process of going through that and actually discovering what we can do and what we can do to sort of push the limits and give the perception of like way more depth and everything, but still like working to the limitations of the consoles, ended up sort of translating into Croc, I think. So I think it helped a lot with those arenas and the way the environments are constructed.
And developing that free FX Spider, I mean, that was at a time, that was like before 3D accelerators were even a thing, like which is, I mean, just made it so much more difficult.
Might have designed the first 3D accelerator. The first GPU was was the Super FX chip for Nintendo.
Oh, right.
Oh yeah. Of course. Of course. I mean, I always say, like, you know, the first Star Fox is my favorite of the series. Like, I like it a lot more than every other game in the series. And, you know, everyone says, like, I can't believe you like it more than 64. And it's like, it's better in every way. You know what, if you put a game, if you put a Space Armada into a game, like, that means that I'm automatically gonna like it. And
on FX Spider.
Right,
no, on Star Fox.
Oh, Star Fox.
Kind of riffing on the Star Fox, because I mean, I love. I mean, one of the first videos I did on this channel was about Star Fox, and like I won my local Star Fox Super Weekend, so I still have my jacket and stuff. But I love that first one so much.
You talked earlier about emulation, and it always astounds me not only that you can emulate the SNES on modern hardware, but they've emulated the Super FX chip. Like, that's a really hard chip to emulate, and they've managed to run Star Fox and Stunt Race and all those old games. Like, it's the emulation world has just gone amazing. Like, so unexpected how much they can emulate now.
Yeah, I don't know if you all have heard that the guy who did Doom on the Super FX chip, like kind of further optimized it, and they're like releasing. I don't really know the details of like
what Doom version.
Yeah,
like he's
what
calling
the
this like the Super FX 3s.
Like, yeah. But I want to say he optimized the code for running on the Super FX 2 as well. But yeah, they are like doing like some sort of different hardware. I'm not entirely sure. Whoopsie. I don't really know the tech details, but it's
I've heard of some new Super FX chip being done, but I don't know what's different about it than the Super FX chip that we built.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like producing a new chip back then to producing it now is
Yeah,
it's pretty easy to do it now. Now you do it.
Pretty different. I mean, there was no standard for what you guys were trying to do back then, right? Like no one really tried to do anything quite like that before.
There were no standards for sure. Yeah, we designed everything. We designed the microprocessor. We designed the instruction set. We wrote all the code. We would then use the code to redesign the instruction set. It was all hard work and a lot of effort by our amazing tech team.
Jez, was Carl Graham involved with that a lot?
Yeah.
I do remember.
Pete and Carl, they were the designers of the instruction set, and they would write the 3D code, and then they would design an instruction set to run the code, and then they would write the code again. Like, they would optimize the hardware and the software at the same time, and then James Hakewill, Ben Cheese, Rob McCauley would design the microprocessor itself.
Wow, that's. I remember going into the
Sorry?
Was Carl and Pete?
Yeah, Pete and Carl. Yeah.
That's right.
Pete Warnes.
Yeah, I remember going into the IT room and seeing Carl working in there on it. I was like, "What are you doing?" I thought you were.
And Carl's claim to fame is the author of Buck Bumble.
Right, that's true.
Were you all involved at all with the SA1 chip?
Remind me which? Oh no, but which one was the SA1 chip?
The SA1 was used
like
in
Kirby
Superstar, Kirby's Dream Land 3, Super Mario RPG. It was never really used for 3D in the way that that Super FX was, but some homebrew developers have used it for 3D stuff. I mean, it sounds like it would have been very, very capable in a similar way to Super FX had they wanted to use it for 3D.
So I don't know anything about that chip. I know that there was a Pilot Wings DSP that all it could do was 3D math. It couldn't do anything else.
Right.
Super FX chip could do 3D math. It's fully programmable and pixel rendering, so it could do. So it's a modern day GPU in, you know, it could do the vector math, it could do the rendering, it could do the shading. It's basically, you know, exactly like a modern day GPU, only a long time ago, so not as powerful as today's GPUs. I don't know what the SA1 chip does. I assume it doesn't do pixel rendering.
I think it was largely used for a lot of like decompression and stuff like that.
It
like,
was probably another DSP that's similar to the Pilot Wings one.
Yeah, it was kind of what Nintendo tended to use in like starting like about 96 and 97, as opposed to, you know, stuff was still shipping with Super FX, or I think technically Super FX 2. Man, that guy wrecked me.
I mean, people
I
don't
need to
know
collect
this,
some gems again.
Super FX chip and Super FX chip 2 are the same chip. There was just one minor bug that meant that Super FX 1 ran at half the speed of Super FX 2. But they were the identical chip, just Super FX 2 had one thing fixed, one tiny bug that made it run twice as fast, and that was the only difference.
Wow, that's interesting.
But identical circuit, like literally everything the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was the Saturn the way it approached polygons, Jez? Was it different to the PlayStation? I remember hearing some sort of
or rectangle polygons.
Quads.
I think.
Yeah, wasn't it like it was sort of doing like distorted 2D imagery or something, just 2D sprites or something? Or was that wrong?
Yeah, that would. I don't know, but that would make sense.
Yeah, something about that.
Yeah, I think it's just like rotating the stuff and the plane in a weird way. But yeah, it uses rectangles instead of triangles.
But triangles make more sense, but never mind.
There was another super chat asking more about the development side. Asking, what was the reason for using static meshes instead of brushwork in the original version? Games like Quake were famous for being entirely hand modeled by the level designer. Did static meshes streamline level creation? Won't static meshes use more RAM? I mean, it's pretty.
Are you talking about like how the environments are put together out of pieces? Is that what you mean? Or?
I'm not sure.
Because I know putting environments together, we wanted to come up with a solution where we don't have to have, you know, dozens and dozens of pieces, because you've got to be thinking about memory and about how to edit that stuff. And, you know, our environments are obviously static, so we would go with stuff that, you know, serves that purpose and would look good. But yeah, not entirely sure the exact meaning of that question.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that question so I can see.
Oh, it's just I can copy and paste it into this chat.
Is it a colored one in the chat?
Yeah, but I copied and pasted it into our chat window here. That if you
what was the reason for using static meshes instead of brushwork? I don't really know what brushwork means. Games like Quake were famous for being entirely hand modeled. Okay, I don't really know what that means, but I mean, I think Quake is more of a static environment. Our environment is made of models, so we have objects placed. So the landscape is like blocks of objects, and then everything in the world is objects as well that are animated. But the animation system is crude by today's level because it's not skeletal animation and it's not real-time skinning. It's, you know, animated meshes and body parts.
But it has, you know, that's what I like about it, is that it has like a human touch to it. You know,
yeah, but we didn't have the processing power to do the kind of animation systems that you can do today. This is 30 years ago CPU.
FX Spider everything was basically object groups. It wasn't, you know, it was like overlapping pieces of ARM and stuff. There was no like skinning. It was just way too expensive.
Yeah.
So this was kind of like a sort of in-between sort of process of that compromise, if you like.
So you learned a lot from doing the FX Fighter that could be used in this. Or
yeah, I mean, to some degree, Croc was a little easier on us because the characters are mostly just, you know, flat color. you can sort of get away with like pieces overlapping. You don't notice the seams maybe quite as much as if things were textured so much. You know, we obviously have textures in the characters, but less so. So I think the style kind of made it work, and it also it kind of gives it sort of a bit of a charm. It's almost a bit like a ragdollish kind of look with sort of like the little, you know, sort of shaped little arms and stuff, I think.
So every game that we built, we built it with the learnings of previous games. So
yeah.
You know, the Croc strat language, the language we used to build the behaviors of all the creatures, that evolved from the Star Fox strat language. You know, I think Star Fox might have been one of the first games to use a strat language. And what that mainly does is empower your game designers to actually directly involved, you know, in the creation of the game. Instead of what used to happen was the designers would ask the programmers to implement something. Once you have a strat language, the designers can actually implement it themselves. So you know, that's probably every game has that now, but back then this was one of the first.
So the endless testing to make things look and feel right, the designers and artists could do it by themselves without going back to the programmers. So endless time went into making Croc walk a certain way. You know, how fast does he move? A little slower, a little faster. You could do that without having the programmers recode. They're just playing with a variable in the language.
I was just looking through the Moby Games listing for Argonaut just to see like what some of the really early games that were done there, and I was surprised to see Race Driving on the Game Boy.
Yeah, that was.
I show that.
I mean, that game,
I show that one off all the time. I'm always showing that to people on YouTube because it's amazing. I'm like saying, imagine taking one of the most expensive arcade machines of the time that was running hardcore graphics. I think it was 60 FPS, 640 by 480 or something thereabouts.
Yeah.
And you're running that on a Game Boy, which, you know, I'm being a little mean here, but isn't a whole lot more powerful than a pocket calculator.
Yeah.
It's obviously a lot more powerful than that, but still, if you're thinking about it. And it looks so good. It's incredible. It's amazing what was done with that. I obviously think it's a showcase.
I mean, that feels like it would be just terrifying to even say like, yeah, we're going to try to do that. But at the same time, you must have been thinking, I think we can do this. And I mean, it would be amazing if we did it. You know, just to...
That's like every game we did. You know, it was push the tech, try to make it as good as possible, and do what people don't think is possible. That's practically every game we did was like that.
Development back then was very different. You know, you're working with such extreme limitations of memory and performance and everything that, you know, you had to work really hard to squeeze everything out of it. And now we have so much power, you know, in PCs and consoles and everything else, and, you know, a huge amount more memory. That development now is all about, you know, getting it working, getting it functioning. Okay, it works. Let's put it in there. You know, it's back then it was, you know, we were employing all sorts of crazy tricks. You know, the crystals, I wanted to do them 3D originally, but just to have a whole bunch of them on in the environment and with the coloring that I wanted on them, you know, was just impossible. And I just took them into 3D Studio and rendered it with about 4 lights around it and, you know, spun them out as sprites. And considering you see most of the game at roughly this angle, it just kind of worked, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a pretty convincing trick that still mostly works, even when you're looking in the HD mode here. You know, like, it would not have... I don't think I would have thought, like, oh, are those just sprites in this HD version if I wasn't, like, you know, actively interested in, you know, seeing how the game was put together. I'm like, oh, okay, they're doing the same thing as in the original, but it's pretty convincing, I think.
Yeah, it was interesting too, because like I started doing mobile games around 2009, which was like a year and a half after iPhone came out or something. And a lot of developers were struggling because the phones back then were not powerful. And it was quite interesting to sort of go back and re-employ some of those old tricks that you'd done on, you know, PlayStation and Saturn and Jaguar and all these consoles back then, because kind of bring them onto mobile phones to have some sort of like semblance of an interesting 3D world or something. So that was kind of cool.
Do you think back in those days, when you all were getting started with Argonaut and through the 90s, do you think that there was maybe like a different kind of tech culture between like Japan, not Japan, well maybe Japan, but I was thinking more specifically like between the UK and the US due to the different types of microcomputers that were popular in each region? I mean, they were different,
If you go back early enough to the like very early 80s, the UK had a home computer renaissance. It had the BBC computer in 1981, 82. It had the Sinclair ZX Spectrum in 1982. And those home computers bred some very, very smart programmers who were able to program in assembler and who were able to eke out the performance of the hardware. And then those programmers later got onto Amigas and Commodore 64s and PlayStations. And so the UK had some very skilled developers, probably more skilled than any other country in the early years. That gap has been, overtaken now, and now there are great developers everywhere. But back then, I think the UK had some very, very high quality assembler programmers that could do wonders with, low end hardware.
Yeah, I mean, I did a little bit of work on the Worms Armageddon re-release that just came out, and just like hearing about the stories of development for that first Worms game, just figuring out how to make it all work, and it was really pretty crazy.
And I imagine because of like the 50 hertz, 60 hertz sort of split that there was probably a lot more effort put in by European developers to like actually make sure that like PAL conversions were done in a satisfying way, right?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, in a way, it's if you develop for PAL, then you're developing at 25 frames a second. It's easier than developing at 30 frames a second because you've got more time per frame to render more stuff. So it's actually harder to do the American version, or you have to scale the number of polygons in your scene to run at 60 or 30 hertz rather than 25 hertz. So you would develop it for the American version, and then the PAL conversion is easy.
Right. But I mean, I feel like in terms of the, just like the speed of the underlying game logic seems to run at like the same. I'm no programmer, so I'm using bad language here, but it seems to me that like in a lot of European games, the amount of time it takes for some action to go from point A to point B is the same measurement in terms of real minutes. Whereas I think a lot of games developed for 60 hertz first, it's just like, we'll slow it down 17% for PAL,
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I mean, well, that's just a technical point of view that you obviously want the animation system to be synced to the frame rate, but you don't necessarily want the movement system to be synced to the frame rate. You want that synced to time, regardless of the frame rate.
Another slight difference probably is that the U.S. early on got into licenses and repeats. Let's do this sports game again and again and again. And UK, while they did a lot of ports, there were really two sets of development houses in England. There were the original houses and the porting houses. And the original houses, I mean, they were really original. They were very creative.
Yeah.
So
there was a $20 super chat from
Whoa.
Robert Hernandez a
Wow.
little while ago.
Thank you.
Thank you. He said, I just want to take an opportunity to thank you all for this wonderful game. I had the privilege of testing Croc at a SCEA third-party QA and have loved the game ever since. Can't wait for the re-release. I mean, it's cool to see so many people who played this back in the day, have really been coming out and excited for this game and just really showering it with love. And it's got to feel pretty nice to know that it's endured as long as it has for a lot of people.
What's been nice too is people that are younger than the game is, as being fans too. I've met a lot of people who are like, my dad showed me this game and I've been hooked on it ever since. And, I love retro games and going back and playing some of the old catalogs. And yeah, I've met so many people of all ages and walks of life who loved Croc, and it's always been lovely, feedback from them and just great memories. So it's very nice.
Who was responsible for the character design of Croc, or was
That
it
was
just
Simon
kind of
Keating.
Simon Keating?
Simon Keating was our concept artist, and I would work with him. He would honestly, produce so much amazing stuff that it was very hard to sort of choose. Sometimes he was always very, very good at what he did, and he had always new ideas every day.
Mm-hmm.
I, as the lead artist, I would work with him on, maybe refining some of his ideas a little bit. But yeah, Simon Keating designed. He just had such a quirky, sort of fun, distinct style that just everything he drew, whether it was a character or an environment or a puzzle or a trap or something, just had this kind of, innate charm in it. It was amazing.
Well, something that's
something
pretty
about that
interesting in the...
I feel like it started with a tooth and worked back from the tooth.
Well, we wanted to do 2 teeth, but there was not enough performance for it. So
I think having just the one tooth is, it's a defining part of Croc. It's like the tooth in the backpack.
By the way, guys, I'm kidding about that for people in the chat. So.
So Simon was this was one of his first games. He was a really young guy. Mm-hmm. He was both a designer doing levels and a concept artist. Very quiet back then. And he produced amazing stuff.
While we're talking
designed some of the really cool levels.
There's some neat stuff in this Crocopedia, including all of these different potential animals that Croc could have been. But what's so interesting is they all have a very similar body shape, and I think they all could have equally worked.
Yeah,
it's almost like Croc skins, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's giving different outfits.
I really like the dragon. Oh, there's Robo Croc,
platypus,
and a tiger. They all work. Bang the dog.
Oh yeah, there's Keating signed on the art here.
Oh, okay. I really wanted to take a moment to welcome Mike Arkin to the chat here, who is the producer on the Croc Remaster, along with having done a lot of crazy stuff, been involved in a lot of games over the years. Welcome,
Mike.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to unmute.
Oh, that's all right.
How are you? Thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
This
has been a lot of fun so far.
I've kind of been watching a little bit, just watching the game played. It's kind of fun to watch. It's fun when someone else is playing.
I guess that's got to be the hard thing, just having lived with it for so long, and then you get just to see other people play, and it's it's kind of nice just to know that everything's working.
Yeah.
It's 25 years of Croc.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should tell the story. I was producer on the PlayStation game for 1 day. So.
Yeah, please go ahead and just for the chat, just introduce yourself and say what your history with Croc and Argonaut is.
Well, hi, I'm Mike. Let's see, who am I? Yeah, I'm a game developer. I've been doing this since 1987, and when I was at Acclaim in, I don't know, 1988 or something, I got dragged into a room in London with Jez and Fu, and they were pitching something completely that I had no idea about. And so, I've known Jez since then, and every year they would come and pitch their latest stuff to us. And years later, I was at Fox, and somebody walked in and said, we're going to do this Croc game. Can you handle this? I was like, I'm too busy. And so they had this packet. It was like a design document and a CD, and they put it on my desk. This is yours now. And I really didn't want it. I was working on Die Hard, and I just really, I just was like, I'm too busy. So after everyone went home, I took it and I put it on the next guy's desk, which was Dave Stalker. And then, the next day he put it on my desk. And I think we went back and forth for a week. And then I quit and went to Activision just to get away from Croc, I guess. And the joke was on me, right? I was like, I had no idea it was going to be this huge success. So I should have, in retrospect, left it on my desk, and I could have had this, huge game on my resume. But I went to Activision. I produced Battlezone, which was huge critical success, but a commercial failure. So yeah, I really should have just worked on Croc instead. But
this is a neat new lighting effect. The water caustics. If you go to the original.
Oh yeah.
Mode.
Because without it, it almost looks like it makes it hard to tell that he's even in water.
Yeah.
That's great.
And you can still see it if you turn on the new models and but still use the old unfiltered textures.
Mm-hmm.
But if I go to enhanced lighting, yeah. So you can turn, if you wanted to turn that off separately, you could, but that's a nice touch.
Yeah.
I've worked on a bunch of remasters of different games, and every time we do it, somebody says, "Oh, can we have the original models? Can we have the original textures?" And every time I just say, "No, we're not doing that. That's it's a bad idea. It's gonna be so much work. To support the old and the new." And in the case of Battlezone, we had all new models, so it would totally have been out of place. It would have been just trouble. And with Croc, I think nobody asked me, so the team just did it anyway. So luckily,
it's so worth it. It's so worth it. I appreciate it a lot. I think it looks amazing, and it's good for preservation and context. It's just good for sometimes when you only see the shiny new in a game, then some of the old aspects of it may seem a little out of place. But then when you see this is why it was originally like this, it kind of makes sense, and you just kind of accept it a little more easily, I think.
Yeah. Visually, but I don't think that there's an option to have the classic controls, which is good. The original game is difficult to go back and play.
This is just a correction there. So the original tank controls are still, the D-pad still does what the D-pad did.
Oh.
So
okay.
The only thing that isn't preserved is
the
original camera. Because we did make the camera better. So you still can have those original, tank controls on your D-pad.
Yeah.
But the original camera was just not great, and the new camera is better. We think. And so, I think that there was a moment where we said, "Oh, do we want to have that original camera?" And we're like, "No, nobody wants that."
Other than that, the controls are actually, it's interesting. You tap, you can still sidestep by hitting R1, L1. You can hit B to do a quick turn, which is a really common feature nowadays. And I was surprised when I popped in the PS1 version yesterday when I was just looking between the two versions. I was really surprised, whoa, that quick turn is in the original game, and that was a big innovation. When Resident Evil finally introduced. I forget which game introduced that series, but that was like a big deal. Like many years after Croc. Like, oh man, that's really nice that they have that quick turn there. It's so interesting to see that implement, and one of these like really pioneering platforming games. It's like, hey, there it is. It's surprising.
Yeah.
Other than the camera, like almost everything is as it was, including the analog control, which is very freeform in the PlayStation version as well. Although I'm not sure if like the exact if it's been tweaked a bit, because it feels
It's been tweaked a lot.
Feels good.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if anyone told the story yet, but the original PlayStation, like a lot of people don't remember this, the controller that the PlayStation shipped with was not analog.
Right.
And so that analog stick, the original DualShock, came out like a week before Croc was done. And so I think, somebody probably handed a controller to an engineer and said, here, make this work. And there was so little, I mean, somebody probably spent 5 minutes on it, right? And then we shipped. So really, that was a big thing for us from like the very, very beginning. Hey, we really need to make these controls more modern. A designer is just going to really dig into this and just like clean sheet of paper. How do we make the controls as good as we can? So we did, and it does, I think, reflect like what would be like the modern, kind of control system that you'd expect on a modern game.
Yeah, it did take developers a surprisingly long time, I think, to establish the standard of like, oh hey, right analog stick is camera. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that.
Yeah, the game was finished. We were almost through QA, which is a massive process. We were way past every feature freeze. We were already looking at certain bugs, saying, okay, that's below the threshold. We won't fix it. And the damn new controller comes out.
And not even the DualShock. It was just the dual analog without the rumble built in.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It was just,
right. Yeah.
And my answer was absolutely not. We've got to win every game. We're going to ship it as is. No new controller. And Fox and Sony said, "You're wrong. We're not approving it unless you support our new controller." So
there
we
is
said, okay,
for it in there, but
we'll do the absolute minimum to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And we won't screw around with the game.
I mean, I think it works in the original version.
Yep.
Do you remember if the Sega Saturn version supports the 3D controller?
I don't think that existed at the time. I think that was later.
Yeah,
I am not too certain of when that one came out.
When I worked on 2 Saturn games, I mean, Saturn came and went really fast. I think people don't remember how quickly Saturn. I don't want to say a bad word, but like it was not successful, right? Like very quickly.
we got some people in the chat saying that the Saturn version does support the 3D controller.
Oh,
okay.
Well, there you
what
go.
do I know? I quit in the middle.
The PlayStation was such a massive success.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just blew everything else away. I came out of the 3DO world, and we were destroyed by it. It was over.
Wait, you came out of the 3DO world?
Yeah, I was doing developer relations at 3DO and then the European rollout.
Oh, okay.
And then the PlayStation came out and we started shrinking. So I got laid off, and that's when I went over to Argonaut.
I see. I have a soft spot for the 3DO. I like it.
We did Creature Shock on 3DO and CDI, didn't we, Jez?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And CDI. I know we have some.
Jaguar too, I think.
And we designed CDI2, which never came out.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Oh,
We designed the CDI2.
Yeah, we designed a few things that never came out. Yeah, it was CDI2 for Philips, and then the head of Philips went to Apple. His name was Gaston Bastien, and he joined the Apple Pie division. And then we designed a 3D console for Apple that never came out, that was going to compete with the PlayStation.
Oh, wow.
And we designed, what was the other one? Oh yeah, and we designed the Hasbro VR machine that never came out. So yeah, we got got a bit tired of designing hardware for companies that never shipped them.
All these design documents in the bowels of these companies. Like,
Oh,
never
yeah.
to
You
be
also
seen.
did CPU. Was it S3 or somebody? There was a
What was
3D. You did a 3D accelerator for someone.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
never
that's
came
right.
out.
Yeah, we did a 3D accelerator for Cirrus Logic.
That's right. Serious.
That was, unfortunately, Nvidia came out with their shitty first chip, which was really low end and didn't do anything. But that swept the market, and then Cirrus decided not to enter that market. So another one that didn't ship.
Wow. I mean, that's so interesting because I mean, it was a crazy time of all these other companies trying to get into games.
Or just figure out what to do next. Like, how do you move on from the 16-bit generation? Like, what's the next step?
Oh, there was another one. Sorry, we didn't. We designed the PlayStation 2 chip for LSI Logic as well.
Yep.
Oh,
And that didn't come out. That was
the list. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, 90s were a crazy time. I mean, it was just so much innovation, and of course, every machine going next was, the jump in graphics was huge.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting some diminishing returns a little bit now.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
a shame.
Now, Jez, there was
They're all based on PC architecture now, so they're like
It's all
I mean, we
Zen.
could,
the tech is all the same generation, no matter who it comes from.
I mean, we say that a lot on this channel, like on these streams and stuff, that we kind of wish that things would just like let the hardware mature and just like maybe we can get 4K games running at 60 FPS just like reliably for everything. Just like focus on that as for the hardware, and then just like games look good enough for a while. We don't have to
It's so
constantly.
It's so interesting how gamers now comment on games. Back in the day, it was just like, oh, this is a great game. I love this game. It's fun. It's really cool. And now people are sort of like saying the shadows aren't right, and there's
Yeah, I mean,
the picking out little graphical things and pixel peeping and looking at upscaling, and it's just it's gotten so technical now. I'm generalizing a bit here, but it's definitely some of that going on.
Well,
yeah, I ride that line. I think that sometimes, like, I'll notice certain things, but it doesn't affect the amount of fun that I'm having.
right. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I wish that looked a little bit better, but whatever. And then you just
Or this looks fine. I don't need to, be disappointed that maybe it's not running at a locked 60 FPS at all times.
I mean, that's why I like console games, because like when I notice a problem, I just say, well, whatever, and keep playing. Whereas if it's a PC game, then I'm like, wait, what's wrong with this? Should I change my
Tweaking
settings? Do I need a better graphics card? Like,
Update my
it's like
drivers.
I can fix this. I can fix this, and I spend all my time trying to fix it than just playing the dang game.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
I've had
still
a lot
trying to
of
get
that.
Crisis running on my PC.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
So what was it like in terms of like designing like hardware back then, these graphics accelerators and stuff, where I mean, like I don't even know, especially at that time, like where the process begins and ends in the sense of like you're designing these things, but then like someone has to manufacture like your prototypes before you can even really see how it's functioning, right? Like it's got to be a bit of a sluggish process, or I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, in the old days, it was very sluggish, and you would design the chip manually by hand, and then you would send it off to be fabricated, and you would get a prototype back like 6 weeks or 8 weeks later, and then you could test it, and then you'd send it back again for after you fix some bugs. So that was how it used to be done, and that was very slow and meant that you didn't do any experiments, you didn't try anything, you just played safe. With the SuperFX chip, and then also the next chip after that, the Argonaut RISC core, we designed the Arc using programmable gate arrays. We used Actel chips, and then later Xilinx. So we were able to rapidly prototype, and so we could actually design the chip and burn it and test it and see the result within a day, which meant you could do experiments and you could refine it and you could optimize it. And I think we were very lucky that we were one of the first people to be able to do that. We were able to take advantage of this new technology, which was programmable gate arrays, that let you rapidly prototype silicon when no one had been able to do that before. So yeah, we were in the right place at the right time to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, I don't know if you all are aware. I mean, I'm sure that was like pretty expensive back then to get your hands on the programmable gate arrays, because are you at all aware of like the fact that like FPGAs are like the hot thing in retro gaming right now?
I was not aware of that, but I mean, I'm not sure where programmable gate arrays have got to these days, because I've lost touch with that.
Oh yeah, it's
world.
so this company Terrasic, they make a like a student. It's kind of primarily targeted towards like universities and like you know, learning to program robotics or something like that. It's called the DE10 Nano. And people repurpose that and have built this entire ecosystem around it. I mean, there's people who are, you know, making a living making accessories for this project that it's called the Mister, and it runs all kinds of, you know, emulation cores.
Like obscure consoles, the handhelds,
obscure consoles,
like
microcomputers.
boards.
You know, you can run an Amiga or whatever, like in a, you know, a cycle accurate. You know, a lot of people act like, oh, FPGAs are, you know, this magical thing. It's not emulation. It is emulating it, but it's emulating it in a way where like the hardware tasks can run in parallel versus, you know,
it's
the
emulating
way
the hardware.
the sequential method that has to be used by a software emulator. So, but yeah, if you've ever heard of the company Analog, that makes like Super NT and Mega SG, they're like Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis or Mega Drive for you guys, or the Analog Pocket, which is like a handheld Game Boy Advance. You know, those actually run the real original cartridges, and you know, reading them in real time. You know, rather than having to like dump them like another emulator device might have to do, because they're running on hardware versus software emulation. So yeah, it's kind of the big thing is these you know, FPGAs running you know, running hardware emulation. It's really been the big thing in like the hardcore retro gaming scene. You know, we review a lot of these devices on our channel. It's been the big thing for like past, like, I don't know, like
It's like 6 years, I would say.
Yeah, like
we loved FPGAs because, you know, we were the first people to use them for gaming. The Super FX chip was designed on an FPGA, and we were the first people to do a microprocessor on an FPGA because they weren't available big enough until that moment. And
Wow.
even then, the Actel chips, we would have to upload our the netlist, the silicon definition. We'd have to upload it to Actel in San Jose, and they would FedEx us the chip overnight so that we could test it the next day. We couldn't program it ourselves at that moment because it was too new. But obviously, you know, the year after, you could then program them yourself, and then many years later, then you had RAM-based, you know, FPGAs like Xilinx's, whereas back then only the Actel was powerful enough and large enough to do a microprocessor. But now, the programmable gate arrays are huge, and you can do like really sophisticated circuits on them.
yeah.
So, Jez, they were not field programmable then?
Sorry?
They were not field programmable?
Well, they
Yeah.
called them field programmable gate arrays, but they were not field programmable. The one that we used for the Super FX chip that was big enough to have a whole Super FX chip on one chip was not field programmable when we were using it. It was later, it was field programmable, like maybe months or a year later. But when we designed the Super FX chip, we had to FedEx the circuits back. Only they could program them, but at least we got it the next day instead of like months later, like it used to be before you had FPGAs.
I mean, it must have been
By the
really
time we were doing
expensive.
the ARC chip and the LSI logic, the PCs had also gotten powerful enough to do a real C simulator of
Yeah, we had
the
cycles.
design.
Yeah, we had software simulation, hardware simulation, and yeah.
So we do this whole array of tests. We run a C system simulator, download it to the FPGA. Although they were still size constrained and they were really expensive, and then go off and do test chips. But so this would be like 98. All the possibilities opened up for simulation.
That's that's so cool.
I'm going to hit a couple of these super chats really quick. Let's see here. There's $5 for Chris Fratz, who says, I remember hearing that the PS1 version had reverb on some of the audio in caves. Is this going to be added in the remaster? And I think that H to the B, who had a donation of €6, asked something very similar, saying, will ambient sounds like cave echoes be included? Some noticed they were missing in the previews. If not, why not add them back in?
Yes.
All right.
Very succinct answer there.
I mean, as it stands right now, this does not have a release date. Like it's does not does not have a release date. So all this stuff is still in flux, I'm sure.
Yeah, so let me avoid that question. But what I would say is that, one of the challenges that we've had is that we're porting, essentially what we found was the PC code. And so this is, even the console versions, right, are based on the PC version of the game. And there are some very small differences. And even like, we don't know why. Like the gong has a different texture on the PC version. And we'd love to know, like, just because we're super curious, like why they did that. We have all these kind of speculation. Texture sizes were different. The hardware couldn't handle. Like, we don't know. We're just, making up answers. And so the reverb. It seems like there was reverb on PlayStation. I guess the sound hardware was better, maybe, and PC it wasn't. So there's a few things like that we've caught. Funny enough, when we released our trailer, people caught that for us. So we'd get, comments on Twitter, and it was like, hey, the gong, hey, these textures are wrong.
Well,
so we'd have to, go back and look.
And that's why I say it's so great that the original textures are, that it's an option for people to go back to, because, like I say, I think that the light touch approach to a remaster can be really valuable, because people do have memories of these things and they want they want it to be what it was, but more accessible and with a few modern niceties. That's what people want,
So, and I've worked on like 8 different remasters, and at the beginning of every project you have this conversation. Like, are we redoing everything? Are we changing the engine? Should we just leave it the way it was, And it's not always an easy, there's not always a simple answer, right? And so, with Battlezone, that was the first one I worked on. We said, people are still playing this game. People are still playing online, so they want the same game.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have a responsibility to deliver that game. Mm-hmm. And, again, in that case, we also had the source code, so we were able to keep it the same. And with Croc, we had this, everyone we would talk to, we would constantly run into people who would say, oh, I played that with my dad. Or, that was the first game I played, or, my first PlayStation game. And people seemed so, I want to say nostalgic, but something a little more emotional than that. Like, people really loved that character. Mm-hmm. And, we ran into people at other game companies and around the world. And so we just, we looked at each other and we said, okay, well, first things first, it has to be the same game. So, we're not going to rebuild it in Unreal or a custom engine or anything like that. We have to keep the original code because it'll feel identical. And then you know, that at that point we started talking about the camera and things like the controls, and it was like, okay, but it still has to feel right.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because there's, I guess, the speedrun community is really into Croc, and they have this there's this hover thing that they do. I still haven't figured out how to do it, but to do a real good speedrun of Croc, you have to do this crazy hover thing. And so they have been asking me for like 8 months if we kept the hover, and I have no idea because I don't know how to do it. So
I've never done that.
so but apparently I've just been told today that because we spun up some of the speedrun guys, we kind of put them in a private channel and gave them copies of the game to play. And one guy was like, "Oh, I noticed the hover's still in." I was like, "Oh, it is cool."
Totally intentional.
Totally, yeah. Like,
Thanks for noticing.
I actually assumed it was fixed, only because it was part of the. It's literally like a bug in the controls, right? It's like you jump, you spin, you do this.
Well, that's what speedrunning is.
Yeah.
is
Right.
bugs. Is utilizing bugs.
Yeah.
You know, speedrunning. They say that when you're speedrunning, you're not playing the game. You're playing a different game. You're it kind of becomes this meta game essentially, and
it's like just a bunch of shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
warping through walls, and you know.
Yep.
I swear, if somebody made a game, like if I really wanted to appease the speedrun community, I'd have a shortcut at the beginning that just takes you to the end of the game, and make it like a 7-second speedrun.
Oh, it'd be no fun though because no one had to like work hard to figure it out.
Well, you know what? We'd figure out a way that like that the high score table for the speedrun would be like between 5 and 20 seconds. Right? It was like there would be one, like maybe it took you 5 seconds to turn the cheat on or something. We'd make a way to like give them some challenge, but it would be really, really close.
It's almost 3 a.m. for me. If you want to ask me any last minute questions before I go to sleep, now's your chance. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off shortly.
Yeah.
Jez, what's your favorite Argonaut game?
It's definitely Croc, or my first game, Star Glider.
Oh yeah.
Those are both good
Starglider.
answers.
Starglider.
I applied for a job at Argonaut because of Starglider.
Really?
Oh.
I had Starglider on the Spectrum, and then I got Starglider 2 on the Amiga. And my friend Richard, I was like 12, 13 years old or whatever it was, took me to a magazine shop and showed me this new Starglider 2, and I was like, "Oh, this looks amazing." And he says, "Oh, it's for this new computer called the Amiga." And I was like, "Oh no, I've got to buy a whole new computer for this. This looks amazing though." I was like, I had to buy it. So yeah, I fell in love with that game, and it's funny, I'm playing No Man's Sky right now, and it feels like sort of a huge evolution of Starglider. It just reminds me of those games.
And you probably feel like
No Man's Sky
they probably played it.
Yeah, No Man's Sky is a procedural generated game, and Buck Bumble was a procedural generated game. So Buck Bumble was like an early No Man's Sky.
Many years before, yeah.
I think Buck Bumble needs to come back, Just.
Yeah, there seems to be some interest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question, like what else, like after this is finished, what else would you like to bring back? I mean, has there been any kind of like, not a remake, but like, I don't know, has Starglider come out on any like modern-ish?
That I know of. No, every game Argonaut made is a contender. We just need to see what the world wants.
Mm-hmm.
And could be Croc 2, it could be Starglider, it could be Buck Bumble.
Starglider. I mean, I think that would be. I mean, just even for fun, you could just do it yourself. Like just see what you can do with it now.
I'm keeping an eye on Jez because I don't want him to announce things prematurely.
So you're saying there's things to announce prematurely?
I'm not announcing anything. In fact, I don't know anything.
Good. No, that we do that on purpose. Jez
I don't have
prematurely
a copy of
announced.
this game. Like the one you're playing right now, they didn't give it to us.
Yeah, I don't have it either.
Do you
Jez
think that-
accidentally tweeted an announcement of Croc, and
Yeah.
the PR team was very angry about that.
Got a lot of interest though. I will answer someone's question in the chat because I can't respond in the chat. Someone said, "Oh, so the Super FX chip was an FPGA?" No, it was not an FPGA. It was designed on an FPGA running at like an eighth of the speed or a 16th of the speed of the real one, but that let us develop it and optimize it and debug it, and then it was a real. It was a real custom silicon. In fact, it wasn't just a custom cell, it was a full custom silicon with every transistor hand tweaked by Sharp after we designed the circuit. So no, it was definitely not an FPGA in the production.
Yeah, I mean, those were used much more back in the day as a development tool. You know, the whole reason that FPGAs are starting to become popular for use in some of these emulation projects and things like that is because, you know, they've become affordable enough to make for just to include in just a singular product, affordable enough that it would be worth using an FPGA in the product versus, you know, making an ASIC.
Right.
Or at least
Although
for the
my gut
assurance
feeling
that
is that
you could fix
some
bugs.
of these uses for FPGAs today probably could have been done with software emulation or certainly on the GPU. Like the power of a GPU is so powerful now that you could probably emulate any circuit that ran on old hardware without needing an FPGA. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with those products, but I don't know why you would use an FPGA in a instead of software on a modern powerful computer.
Well, it wouldn't be on a computer. It's a separate,
On a handheld or something.
well, it's a separate bespoke device, or you know, the idea is that, you know, they can be compatible with original cartridges, can be compatible with original controllers, because like the polling rates can be aligned with it in a way that is, I believe, less easy to do. You know, because I think you have to do software emulation like in sort of sequentially, whereas you can do all the same tasks in parallel on FPGA.
Yeah,
that's
true.
my understanding.
Like you could do it so fast sequentially. You know, the modern computers, modern CPUs run it in the gigahertz. This SNES, like the SNES that was hosting the Super FX chip was like 1.7 or 1.8 something megahertz. It was like less than 1,000th or less than 2,000th of the speed of a modern CPU, and it was only one CPU, whereas today you have, you know, multi-processor cores and you have GPUs that do enormous things in parallel. So like a modern processor is so much more powerful than what we had back then.
Well, and you know, we're only up to the point where we can do FPGA emulation on FPGAs up through like PS1, Saturn, and N64, and only just at that, right? Like we're not quite up to Dreamcast, PS2, stuff like that, and you can do that on software emulation. So you're absolutely right. It's the actual result is nearly indistinguishable between hardware emulation and you know, with an FPGA or a software emulator, you know, on a computer or something else. It's a difficult thing to explain, but there is an appeal to the way that it works.
Sure, yeah. Well, like,
but it is difficult for.
I mean, it's the same. Like, some people like analog watches that have cogs in them.
Yeah.
It's not for me. But
that's a great analogy, actually.
Well, Jez, I mean, my understanding is that the emulation is more accurate because you're emulating the exact hardware.
if you got your hand on the actual circuit involved, otherwise you are recreating the circuit and trying to make it look the same, but it's not actually the same.
Correct.
I don't know how they would have got those chip designs, like to be able to run them absolutely the same hardware design.
Yeah, I mean,
so
in some cases,
I've got a friend who writes FPGA cores, like for the Mister, and his workbench is a bunch of microscopes, And so
Okay.
they literally
So
they
he's what,
take-
shaving. He's
Yeah,
shaving
like they
chips
decap
off
the
and
process.
then reading the transistors from the
yeah.
die. Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
I guess
the method of implementation varies. I mean, in a lot of ways, I believe that the research is much the same as a software emulator, you know, but it's just that the implementation is
But there's
different.
a lot of like decapping of the chips going on and stuff like that, so they can really break it down that way.
Yeah, not
That's a
all
lot
are
of work.
done that way, certainly, but
That's
there
real
are some that
hardcore.
are done that way.
to shave the layers off a die and see what the
It's-
transistors are doing.
Yeah.
That's real dedication.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
was
mean,
how
it's-
Neo Geo was done.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and you know, a lot of really passionate people. You know, I know that you're winding down here, but I know at least two people that will be angry if I don't at least ask for more details on the CDI too.
Oh yeah. Now let me try and remember what it was codenamed. Oh gosh, we had there was one called Veggie Magic. I think that might have been the Apple chip. What was the CDI one?
And you're
called?
sure this is CDI and not like the 3DO? What was it called? The
No, this was-
M2?
That's
This
the
was,
M2 or
this
whatever.
was CDI 2 that we designed for Philips and it never came out. And then we designed a games console for Apple that never came out. And we designed a VR console for Hasbro that never came out. The VR console for Hasbro was codenamed Rush VR. And we were doing the chip that had 3 Arc microprocessors in it. One for the graphics, one for the audio, one for the game. 3 identical Arc microprocessors. The Arc went on to big things. Luckily, the Arc came out. The Arc was spun off into a separate company, which went public, and now it's owned by Synopsys, and it's one of the most popular microprocessors in the world.
Wow.
It sold
Really?
billions of. I mean, it's inside everything. It's inside memory chips. It's inside microprocessors. It's probably inside your phone. It's not the main processor inside your phone. That's the ARM, but the Arc is used as a building block in lots of chips. So you can look it up. It's Synopsys is the company now that owns it, and it's called Designware, and it's the Arc microprocessor still exists today.
That's
So
amazing.
Jez, the Hasbro VR, was that the skateboard prototype helmet thing we had? 'Cause I remember
Yeah.
trying that on once. I'd heard something about a Nintendo one called the Supervisor.
Yeah,
Is that-
yeah, that's right. We did one for Nintendo. So we did a VR console for Nintendo called Supervisor. Also never came out.
So many.
That's a good name. It's a fun name.
Supervisor, I know it was a cool name. Yeah. Yeah, that never got finished, so at least you can't blame them. That they canned it in favor of the Virtual Boy, which I know is like the ultimate insult. That they
So was
chose
there?
Boy, which was red and had no motion tracking, over our one that was full color and 3D and had motion tracking.
Wow.
What can you do?
But Jez, clearly the future of gaming was red.
Absolutely. No, they
So
fell
the-
in love with the display that was inside the Virtual Boy, and they wanted to make a console out of it, and it was only red.
So
There
the
was
prototype
another. Oh god.
Sorry, just real quick before you go, Jez. The prototype I played with, which was I remember is like a skateboard helmet with the screens hanging down and the ribbon cable I think coming out of it. Was that the Hasbro or was that the Supervisor?
I don't remember, but the Supervisor was really crude. It's probably was the skateboard helmet with displays hanging off it. The Hasbro one was actually only one display with some kind of mirror optics to give you into both eyes, so it wasn't stereoscopic.
Okay.
The Hasbro one, which it wasn't. I don't think it was stereoscopic.
Okay.
Yeah. I was anyway. You can find images of what Rush looked like on the internet. It's there. If you Google Hasbro Rush VR, you'll find it somewhere. It was a very cool system. It's just a shame it would have cost hundreds of millions to ship it. So they designed it, but then shipping it is another problem.
There was another development-oriented donation from Cade the Squirrel, a little while ago, saying any insight you can give on Argonaut's PC software renderer. It seemingly is one of the more performant software renderers of its time. Was there any pre-calculated depth?
So our software rendering technology was called Brenda, and it was designed. It was called Brenda, as in blazing renderer. You can blame Gary for that name. We used it in a number of our own games, and it was used by some third parties. Even Microsoft used it. They did 3D Movie Maker using Brenda, and it was way ahead of its time. And it was, an object-orientated 3D system, and it was able to scale to hardware. But Microsoft decided there were 3 companies doing 3D technology back then. There was Argonaut, Renderware, and Rendermorphics. And Argonaut approached all 3 of us and said, "We're going to buy one of you." Sorry, Microsoft approached all 3 of us, said, "We're going to buy one of you and put the other 2 out of business." And they bought the smallest company, which was the cheapest company, which is Rendermorphics. Luckily, the other 2 didn't go out of business. Like Argonaut and Renderware both carried on going and building games. But that was the end of Brenda back then, because Microsoft bought Rendermorphics and then gave it away for free, called Direct 3D. And that was the start of Direct 3D.
Oh, interesting.
There was also, I know the H to the B had a €6 donation asking if there's any perk to pay to get a nice spot in the credits, especially for many people who love Croc in their childhood. The game was not crowdfunded in any way, so I'm sure that there was not any kind of.
Let him know to send $1,000 to me at my house, and I'll put him on the title screen if he wants. So pictures of his kids.
Maybe
whatever.
Gary and Mike can think about whether there's any way to do that kind of stuff, but I won't add any. Probably it would affect the shipping or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably. I mean, it would be tough to implement that. Hopefully, there will be the second one will follow.
I'm going to hold up a QR code for my Bitcoin wallet. You can just one Bitcoin gets you in the game.
Yeah, it's a bargain. It's a bargain.
You get your own private room that you break through the geometry of the world.
We should do Croc coin.
Jez, we're not going to do that.
Now there's
you know what?
There's a
I
fun.
can't believe there's not a. I can't believe Croc's not in Astrobot.
Okay, now that I've mentioned that, someone's going to do it right now. Like, you can bet. You get 15 minutes.
Who said the Astrobot comment? Who was that?
No, that was just me. That was just
Okay.
me saying I wish that Croc was in Astrobot. It would make sense.
There were some news stories you should Google.
Oh, okay. So I heard something about the credits including characters that were not in it. Like it might show up in DLC in the future.
We can't comment on that.
Well, I'm just saying Croc very much deserves to be in Astrobot. So if that does happen, it'll be.
My
make
kids
total
love
sense.
Astrobot. They're playing it all the time.
It's great, right? I mean, and just think about the game that you made.
Yeah.
It can be traced back to, or Astrobot can be traced back to Croc. Isn't that crazy?
It's a superb game, and for sure, if we had the power of what consoles can do today, Croc and Astrobot, are pretty closely related. But
Yeah,
it's a lovely game.
But
My
just
daughter
thinking
played the
about,
first
how
one.
Astrobot it exists kind of because of your game.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, was Croc the first was it the first 3D platformer on?
Well, we think it was the first one to start, but it wasn't the first one to ship. Mario 64 beat us to it, but that was
On PlayStation.
Oh, on PlayStation. Well, I think
Yeah.
it might have been the first free roaming.
Well, Jumping Flash was the kind of first.
Oh,
The
yes.
Crash Bandicoot was on rails.
Right. Well, Jumping Flash is kind of like an open world, but it's all first person. You're inside that ship, and that one
I
was.
remember I was actually at Sony before I was at Fox, and when the PlayStation, I worked for the PlayStation group, right? And they would send us, here's all these crazy games that are coming out in Japan. I remember Jumping Flash was one of them. So I think that was a launch title. And there was
Yeah.
what was the other one, like Moto Tunes? It's like some kind of racing
Motor
game. It was,
Tune Racing or something like that.
but it was very like everything was very like I
Like
don't know, it
like
was-
jelly cars.
yeah,
kinda.
jelly. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say, jelly.
Yeah.
And you know, it was
Anyone
really
have any
funny.
questions for me before I bail? Before I go to sleep?
Jez, it
no,
looks
but
like
I
you're.
just want to say like it's been a real pleasure to like hear from you and have you join us. I mean, this is
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
it's been awesome. Thank you
See you,
so
Jez.
much.
All right.
Thanks,
everyone's
Jez.
been loving it. Thank you
You
so
can
much.
Keep going as long as you want. I'm going to try and get some sleep because it's 3:15 in the morning.
Thank
I
you.
love your office. Jez, I love your
Thanks,
office.
Oh yeah, yes.
That's his college dorm.
I found this screenshot. Don't kill me.
Oh, you know what's funny is I thought that was your background. I thought
No,
that was your
Jez-
office.
Jez, you
me
need
So
to get out of
nice
here.
big-
Now people are going to start looking at it.
Yeah. And
See you, Jez.
So yeah,
Thanks.
there
Thanks
is
so
there
much.
is my
Take
real
care.
background.
yeah, I
There's
was.
my coffee machine.
Is there a croc back there?
Oh, there probably is. Yeah. Where's Croc? You can't see Croc, but no, there's a Star Fox right behind me. Night.
Take care. Thank you
night.
so
I
much.
just
Bye.
See you, Jez.
Yeah, I was commenting.
I don't know
to
what
him,
I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but Jez's background was something we created for fun. I won't tell too much. Oh, someone's trying to hold. What are you trying to hold
Yeah,
up
you
there?
have to hold up. Oh, I can see it looks like a full-size
Can't-
poster, but it's gonna
John, we can't see it at all because it's being
yeah,
I got
it's
shut off
in
the
and out.
background.
it's being alphaed out.
Oops.
But it looks like
so-
the cover art and a big poster.
So
like,
that
is that like a-
room,
There's like the A6 or something size poster, like the big ones.
John, you gotta turn off your background so we can't see it.
Yeah, how do we do
Anyway, the image behind Jez, it was a room that we created. It's something that'll be like the intro to the game, and it has like 180 Easter eggs in it. And
Oh, wow.
so once the game ships, we're gonna we're not gonna tell the Easter eggs, but we're gonna wait to see. We literally have a checklist, and we're gonna see which ones people find, and then we'll wait a month, and then we'll tell people the ones that they missed. But it's every Argonaut game basically.
I do have a
We would-
question for Scott. Where can I get a Who Let the Crocs Out t-shirt?
Yeah, this is not official Croc merchandise, I should state.
you probably saw it someplace. You're like, oh, I got to get that.
Yeah, I started doing conventions recently.
Mm-hmm.
This past year or so. I'm an actor outside of games. I do both, and I sort of been doing both for conventions. And because Croc is obviously so beloved and there's so many fans, I found there's a lot more interest for the Croc stuff than the acting stuff that I had at the time. And so as I was going to conventions, I was like, I got to get some Croc stuff to wear. And of course, the merchandise is like 27 years old, doesn't exist anymore. So, and my T-shirt that I got from the 90s is very faded. So I bought these on Amazon. So I don't know who made these, but they kind of work. I've got a couple of these. I've got Croc and Roll and Who Let the Crocs Out. So kind of fun.
Is it for the shoes or?
What's that? No, it's just a random, like you can see it here, just a random like T-shirt design.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I do not own Crocs. No, I do not.
I would love Crocs. I'm trying to find someone that will
Yeah,
custom.
make that happen. I won't buy them. My kids will wear them, but there's no way. My
They
kids will
need the
wear them
eyes.
as
They need the
socks.
eyes on top of them. Can you imagine them with the eyes?
Oh
on
my
them?
gosh.
Ah,
I mean, that feels like it should exist, and you could probably work out a deal.
With like one tooth hanging off the side.
it feels like it
Yeah.
should exist, and I'm actually a big Crocs wearer.
Mhm.
So my current shoes are Pokemon Crocs, and I went into a store actually. Someone's dog ate my Crocs, and I had to like buy shoes to drive home. And I went into this discount shoe warehouse, and they only had like blue and red, and I was like, these are awful. What else do you have? It's like, well, we do have these, but you don't want them, right? And it was Pokemon Crocs. I was like, of course I want those. Like, what are you talking about? they're awesome. And but it would be cool. I want to find someone that will custom make Crocs. So if anybody's watching, if you custom make shoes or game consoles,
I mean, you just need a couple of couple of ping pong balls, a black marker, glue,
Right.
stick
Yeah.
on top. You know?
Right.
There's like an entire store that sells like the trinkets that you can put on Crocs. And they've
Yeah.
got to have at the very least.
I have a bunch of those. There's names
Eyeballs.
for those. I forget what they're called, but they always, for some reason, they always fall off my Crocs. I don't know why. Like they're not supposed to. Like they're so hard to get in, but for some reason I'll walk out one day and they're gone. So I don't get it because I used to have a bunch of them, like Star Wars, and Batman.
Changing the subject. Change the subject a little bit. A few rooms back, we were on the ice boss level, and I remember distinctly being stubborn with that and saying, "I want to have reflections."
Oh, I was going to comment on it.
Yeah, See, I had this from FX Fighter with the arenas, when the arenas are supposed to be pretty simple with a 2D background on them, and I was like, I want to add 3D into it. I was that kind of artist. And then the same thing happened with Croc pretty much, where I wanted reflections. Now we couldn't reflect the characters because that's too many characters to draw on screen and too difficult. But I took the geometry of the world, flipped it upside down, threw some polys out of it, made it a little simpler, tinted all the textures bluer, deeper blue, and then basically glued it underneath.
Nice.
But the only problem with it was that it was very hard to gauge where you were on the floor because it was just essentially like a portal to the underneath of it. So then I just put little, and it was too expensive on PlayStation to render a load of transparency all over the screen. So I just made little quads with little scratches on them, and that's what you'll see on the floor. They're just dotted around to give you some semblance of where you are in the arena.
See,
So just wanted to comment on that.
See, I actually think about stuff like that a lot. How, all of these simpler, older graphics techniques, reflections comes to mind a lot. That stuff they used to do that stuff on older hardware, and then, they kind of stopped doing it after a while, and now it's like video games can't even have functional mirrors without ray tracing, right? I know it was expensive to run all that geometry twice, but it's really funny to think about how, like, a funny example is me and our friend John Linneman from Digital Foundry. Last year I did a Let's Play with him where we were playing the Wii version and the PS3 version of the GoldenEye remake that came out from Activision. I mean, it's certainly not at all like the Rare game, but it's a really interesting reimagining, I think. And like in the second level, obviously the PS3 version is looking better than the Wii version most of the time. But on the second level, when you are in the bathroom, there's functioning mirrors where you can see, Daniel Craig in the mirror, and on PS3 it's just vaguely shiny,
Yeah.
And it's like it's somewhere between like, that dolphin architecture and then, Xbox 360, PS3 architecture, like the HD era. Like somewhere in there, it's just like, you know what? Nah, we're not doing cool reflections anymore.
Yeah, I think there's sort of like that thing of like we're working with such limited hardware all the time that we have fun making things, making effects and visual sort of like tricks to sort of fool people.
Yes.
Especially with consoles too, because everyone's getting the same hardware between developers of PlayStation 1 games, for example. So when you can sort of pull off a trick in your game versus, another developer's game on the same hardware, it's kind of fun. It's sort of like, bit of sort of a challenge,
Yeah,
but I think as sort of like game development has moved on, it's almost like, we're sort of spending all our time on, just making the game as lush as, and beautiful as possible, and have a bigger game and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of those sort of, I used to call them NLTs, neat little tricks, have kind of sort of like subsided a little bit, because it's like, instead of like, let's find a way to do it, it's like we don't have the hardware yet to do that properly, so we won't even bother,
Right. I mean,
game development was all NLTs. I mean, if you go back to like the 8-bit days, there was just like, there was so little you could do with the hardware, and if Jez were here, we talk about like, someone said something like it was like Star Fox running on the Game Boy or something. Just the idea of trying to do 3D on a Game Boy or on an NES was impossible. But But Jez and his team actually figured out how to do it, and like the explanation, you know, if he was here and he would explain how they did it, it was so insane, right? It was like, you know, sticking one byte here, one byte there, like all these crazy little tricks. But that was what every game was just crazy tricks back then. But then as the hardware started to get faster, you had to do less of those tricks, and then it was just a 3D model of the world, right? There was no tricks. It's just whatever you could model, you could see, and then you had skeletal animation, and like now today, I think, you know, like you were just saying, today it's you don't have to do any tricks.
That's probably why we have so much diminishing returns with new hardware these days.
Well, we've certainly gotten to a point where, okay, look, this is, you know, the diminishing returns is because it's no longer hardware. Hardware is not a limitation at all in game development. Mm-hmm. It's money, because, you know, if you build a 3D world for Croc and it costs, you know, an artist can build that world in a month, but if you're building like world for Call of Duty, it's 25 artists, you know, for 6 months because of the level of detail. And so now the difference between those two games is just 100% budget. You know, well, not every game can cost $500 million. So now that budget is going to determine how good that game looks. And it's nothing to do with the console anymore. I mean, if PlayStation 6 is 10x faster, that means it costs 10 times as much to make that game.
Much of the magic of Croc is this was the first time anyone did a real platformer. And there's a sense of exploring a world that you've never seen before.
Yeah.
And it was, even if you've played Mario, this is such a different world. You know, you're underground, you're swimming. The platforms are moving in really odd ways. I mean, some of us were jugglers and we tried to repeat what we would do in juggling patterns with the platforms. Some of which turned out to be impossible to play. We would sit there and use the strat language and come up with different ways to move those platforms around. It was, nobody had ever seen any of it before. We were imagining it, and then all those creative little touches that Scott was talking about, and then the really simple ones like the footprints in the desert world.
Oh yeah,
in the snow, and the way you slide on the ice. And those big round wheels. I mean, those really fired up the imagination. And when people came up, either Nick or Simon, with those incredibly creative environments. I remember the team would just coo with delight. Hey, look at this. We'd all stare at it. And, you know, can we actually ship that? You know, are there any problems with it? Well, let's make it work.
I mean, John, you know, sometimes I like to look at these games, like I'm looking at the screen right now and thinking, like, where in the real world would you ever have, like, where you have to jump on 6 platforms to get across, you know, the world, right? Who comes up with this? Like, whose idea was this? It reminds me of Galaxy Quest, right? Where they were like...
We would sit there and talk about it. Okay, what if the platforms sort of go underneath each other, so you got to jump on the top platform and then jump back on the bottom one? And we try it and that works. Okay, what if they did this diagonal thing? No, it doesn't work. It's too hard to play. But the advantage of having the strat language and these incredibly energetic creative designers was that they would come up with ideas and we'd try them.
You got the key.
You know, when we talk about all the hardware that didn't ship, what it makes me think of is all the really cool things that we wanted to put in the game that we had to cut. You know, there's a lot of games that never shipped, and there were some wonderful ideas that we wanted in this game, but, you know, it's got to actually ship.
Yeah.
The mudslide level.
There was.
Remember that, Scott? The mudslides.
Oh, there you go. About the
mudslide. Vaguely. Yeah, I do vaguely remember that.
So we had this concept of Croc going around on sort of a skateboard feeling. And he would go down these mudslides, and it looked really cool. And there were 2 guys, I can't remember who, had really worked hard on these mudslides. But it was time to ship the game. The mudslides weren't finished, and they were full of bugs. And I said, no, we're not going to put more time into that. We got too many bugs to close. We need the artists, everybody else working on stuff that's going to ship. We'll put the mudslides in the next version. And they hate it. And I still hate this decision. I'm troubled by it 35 minutes.
You still lose sleep on it.
But
I think
there's a lot of really creative stuff. At one point, there were just too many creative creatures, and we simplified it down. And that's where all the Dantinis came from. Do you remember that, Scott? We had way too many different animals. It's just getting chaotic. And we said, okay, let's simplify a little bit. And we ended up with the Dantini family of really deadly critters. But that was much of it. That we came up with this world, and we wanted to make it feel like a single coherent world. There used to be more islands. At one point, there were 6 or 7 islands, some of which weren't so great. I mean, the swimming island, first of all, the whole concept of a swimming island, people had trouble with getting their head around it.
Changing the control scheme partway through the game, almost, you know.
And it's a little fidgety, the swimming stuff, so we ended up making the swimming levels part of the other islands. And we did the same thing with the dungeons in the underground. So we ended up with 4 islands with water levels and dungeons and caverns inside them. That, you know, it was an incredibly creative team, and part of it was to figure out exactly how much we can put in the game and how much we have to cut to get it out the door.
I think a lot of, sort of a side point, I think a lot of the reason why retro games are so beloved, aside from the nostalgia of when they played it when they were younger, is that, you know, back in the day when we made games, it was all about the fun. You know, everything we sort of put in was about, it didn't have to make a lot of sense.
Yes.
It just had to be fun. I remember I worked on 8-bit games as well. I started in the 80s, and, you know, we had like, you know, 2D games where the enemies were like a knife and a fork floating back and forth. You know, they had to jump over, or, you know, like a toaster running around. I mean, none of it made a lot of sense, but, you know, it just made this sort of like weird, fantastical world that something you've never seen before. That was just outright fun, and that's all it was. It was 100% pure fun, and that's what we were always aiming for, and that's what Croc was, you know.
I mean, look at the zombie walking along there. Where did he come from?
No, exactly. Why is he spending all his time there? You know, but I know we still have like great platforming games now. I mean, there's some really beautiful ones out, but it's just I think there's you know, there's a lot to be said about the old sort of ways we used to make games. It was, you know, working around the limitations and just making something really, really fun. You know?
I mean, I always like to, you know, harp on, you know, this idea that retro gaming is not just about nostalgia, because, you know, I grew up in the NES era and stuff like that, but yes, I love to revisit my favorite games, but what I find the most joy in is stuff like this. Games that I missed back in the day, like I said at the beginning of the stream. Like I was very much a hardcore Nintendo only guy. And when I finally, you know, succumbed to buying a PlayStation, I'm like, well, I just bought this for RPGs. I'm still gonna play, you know, just play Nintendo platforms on N64. But you know, so I skipped stuff like this, and there's just this huge wealth of these great games that I did not play back in the day, and that I hope is part of why retro games can be successful today, is not just people, you know, buying it for nostalgia, or, you know, I think a lot of maybe game journalists that are like outside the retro scene just think that, you know, games are always new games always equals better, right? You know, like, I could never go back to that. But I just, there's a certain quality to old games that I enjoy, whether it is a game I grew up with or not. Like just discovering something like this that I've never played beyond the first couple of levels before, you know, and having a good time
and to still
with
be
it.
impressed by them.
And still,
you know,
be
like,
impressed by
those,
it.
like those cool little tricks, you know,
the cool little tricks
that are still impressive to go back and just like, oh, that's like that, like still looks so good.
Right. Well, you know, comments that we would often get on our channel, maybe we don't see it so much these days, but we used to have a lot where, you know, we talk about, you know, image quality and stuff like that in retro games a lot. And we you know, people would say like, well, if you care about graphics so much, like, why don't you just get a PS4 or a PS5 or whatever, you know? And it's like, well, first of all, I have one, and second of all, like, that's not the point. Like, you know, for one, we're talking about image quality, but even if we were talking about the graphics, like I can look at, some of those great like Capcom NES games and be like, wow, they did what on the NES? Like that's crazy. Like
Or race driving on the Game Boy.
exactly. Like
I looked at the video, and it looks like it runs better than hard driving on the Genesis.
It probably does.
yeah, exactly. So it's like, you can be impressed within the context of the hardware. Like, I think some people just don't get that. It's like, well, now, I've moved on to, it's got to be native 4K. It's got to be 120 FPS. It's got to be, ray traced, this and that. Like, I can't go back to the old now. And that's just sad. Like you should be impressed. I guess that's another reason I like consoles so much, is like it kind of presents this fixed, defined hardware, and you get a sense of like what you typically see developers do on that hardware. And when a game kind of exceeds that, I think it's it's very special and impressive, and can still have an impact today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the reason why
it's a charming game. It's a world. It's a very satisfied world. The character is cool. I don't think you can overstate how powerful the music was and making it all, and the sound effects and making it charming.
Oh yeah, the music is
When
fantastic.
Justin, Karen, and Richard was the fourth name I was searching for. All those little touches of the sound, when he's underwater, as he goes along, the little sound when he gets the Gobbos, it makes it feel special. And to this day, my kids will come up with that sound every once in a while. It stays with you for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Not just nostalgia, but it was charming. And the world, there we are watching him go down in the underground level, and he's got the light.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cool effect.
I mean, I did not own this game myself when it was new, but my girlfriend at the time, got a PlayStation and got this game for it specifically. It was a system seller for her.
Croc was very much.
One of the interesting things
kind
about
of-
Croc, it was played by girls, and also it was one of the first games that people would watch each other playing. And I think it was because it was a little slower than other games. It was easier to watch, and the aesthetics were nice.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I remember her. She played the whole thing. And it's coming from someone who, as far as I know, didn't really even like games. Maybe only liked games because she was looking for something to talk to me about. And then, fell in love with this. With Croc.
I think one of the good things about this game is that, if you have somebody watching you or sort of, maybe helping you, there's certain puzzle elements and exploration elements to the game that, a second set of eyes can kind of help you with. I remember in the early days, me playing the first Tomb Raider on the PS1, and my mum hated games, and she just got hooked in helping me with the puzzles. She sat with me all the way through Tomb Raider 1. And I think Croc has some of that too, with, some of the sort of unique level elements and things that you do.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like the dream scenario. I would love it if I was just playing something and my wife was in the room and she was like, "Oh, what's this about?" It's just the very fact that I'm playing something. She's like immediately doesn't even.
Yeah.
She's not listening to anything that anybody's saying.
I think a lot of games, it's a lot about running around shooting and sort of grittier, darker things. And I think this game, with its charm, but also with its sort of mysterious caverns and locations and things, there was something for everyone. And I think everybody sort of found something in it that appealed to them. It almost didn't really exclude anyone.
Yeah. I'm gonna hit some of these super chats real quick. There was $10 from Matt Gurley, who says, "Hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving. This Croc Remaster looks really sharp. I'm looking forward to playing it." I love that a lot of people are starting to use the term sharp. Again, my mom used to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Quite,
really
it's quite the resolution bump, isn't it? From
yes.
320 by 240 to I don't know what we're running at now,
Yeah.
4K, but
And
it's pretty astounding.
I noticed in the settings menu, I'm just playing at 60 frames per second because that makes it easier for capture. And also, I'm not playing it on the most powerful computer either. But I noticed that like 120 hertz and stuff like that comes up in the settings menu. So I'm sure that'll please a lot of people. You know, if you're just emulating a PlayStation 1 game, you know, getting higher frame rates can be difficult or probably impossible, I would say. So kind of rebuilding this gives you that option.
Yeah, there's some technical challenges. I mean, some of the animation is locked at a lower rate because it's not a skeletal animation system.
You'll see things like that in cutscenes where, which is I think very understandable. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, and to me, like, I actually value things like that because it does like indicate to me like, oh wow, this really is the original game as it was running underneath this, you know?
Yeah.
And that
it
was
makes it easier to tell when you're supposed to start playing again.
A big part of the Croc story is that we wanted to do this game for a few years, but we couldn't find the code. And Jez had a hard drive in his house with all the original code, and he looked for it for 6 months and couldn't find it. And there was a team of people scouring Jez's house looking for this Drobo that had every Argonaut source code on it, and he couldn't find it. And one of my business partners is a big retro game guy, and I said, hey, we're thinking about doing this Croc thing. Are you interested in helping us? And he was like so excited about it. He said, I really want to work on this. I really want to do this. Is exactly what I want to do. I want to make games like this. And he said, let me go look for the code. And I just laughed at him. I said, I'm looking for the code for a year, dude. Like, what are you talking about? And like 2 days later, he called me and goes, all right, I got the code. And, I guess we didn't look. We thought we were going to find it from somebody who worked on the team or whatever. But, and that was when we found the guy that was working on the definitive edition, which was, he had leaked code and he kept kind of maintaining that code and bug fixing it. And coincidentally, they were both in Australia. So it was like, the dev team and the guy with the code were both in Australia. So, and when we pitched this to Jez, we pitched him the game running on a Switch. So, we, in like 10 days, we ported the original code to the Switch.
Oh, wow.
Oh, dang.
Somebody like, again, my business partner, Jason, he was like, I really want to do this. So he just like slept in the office for a week and a half, and he ported it to the Switch. I mean, it wasn't enhanced at all, right? It was just the original game running on a Switch, but somehow, I mean, Jason's an amazing engineer, right? He's done some amazing stuff over the years, so he was pretty gung-ho about it and got it running. And so when we pitched it to Jez, we did this whole PowerPoint, and it was like, the last slide was like hand switch to Jez. And it was like, oh, by the way, surprise, and here it is running on the hardware. And he was like, wow, how did you do this? So
that's amazing.
That's how we got it approved.
In Australia?
There's a guy named Zane, and he had a leak from years ago, whatever, and so he had maintained it, and he had released it as like a patch called the Definitive Edition, and so you could get this thing, and you could play. Croc would run on modern hardware with a bunch of enhancements that he had made that we basically had to undo, right? Because it wasn't really our plan. So it was kind of it was kind of neat, and he helped us out. And then I can say this because it's announced that if you go to GOG today, you can wish list the game, which we would like everyone here to please do right now. And they've announced that when you buy Croc on GOG, it will come with something called Croc Classic.
Oh,
which is
okay.
the original PC version of the game. Now, obviously, the original game doesn't run, but one of our engineers went in and kind of cleaned it up and fixed it so that it runs on a modern PC without any enhancements, right? Because this is classic. This is the original
Right,
Croc,
right. Oh, that's really
as it
cool.
was. But it's tricky. It's one of those hard things because it's like, well, you can't really ship the original because it won't run on Windows 7 without crashing, and the original game uses a bunch of stuff that doesn't exist anymore, right? Like direct input.
Aren't they kind of like GOG is doing their good old games thing where they're like vowing to like keep certain old games playable, like by updating them themselves?
Yeah, I mean, so
this
that's
initiative that they're doing.
Yeah, so in this case, they're doing it themselves, but we did it for them. We helped them out. So, but that's because we were able to go back to the original source code and like not add any enhancements, just fix things that were literally broken, right? Like DirectX functions that don't exist or things like that. So yeah, I mean, no, GOG really, they're a great partner, and they believe in preservation of these old games, which is something that is really cool. I go there all the time, like I'll just be like, I really want to play, random PC game from the 90s, and you go to GOG, and there it is for $4.
Especially now. I mean, I just bought like $20 worth of things on sale yesterday, and it was. I mean, they have like Mist and Ribbon and. Like, what are some other ones that I got? So I got like SimCity 3000. What is it? Crusader No Remorse, and like the.
I think I have a box.
John had me play that when I
that.
visited him, and
because of the music, right?
I could not get used to the controls, but I am not used.
I see.
I mean, keyboard controls are not easy for me.
I mean, here's the thing that like you need to understand. Back in the 80s or early 90s, that was all we had, right? Yeah. So we had to learn like Doom. You had to learn how to play Doom with keyboard.
Yeah.
Of course, Doom is so simple from an input point of view.
But
But if you took a modern Call of Duty player and you handed him Doom with no mouse, and you said, go play this game, he would like 5 minutes. He would just.
He's
be like,
only using the arrow, being
possible. Yeah.
Arrows.
Right, you had to use those arrow keys, and there was no
WASD.
Yeah, it just didn't exist. So we'd play games like Crusader, No Remorse, things like that. And you had all these crazy keyboard controls you had to learn, but it was normal for us. It was like, growing up in the 1800s and having to, I don't know, I can't think of an analogy, but there were dumb things they did back then, dying at 30 or whatever. But that was gaming back then.
Yeah.
And the NES only had 2 buttons. You kids.
We're big fans of, like limited controls.
Oh yeah.
In games.
Yeah.
Like just appreciating doing more with less.
Yeah, I mean, we had the developer of Volgar the Viking on a month or two ago, and I was telling him how excited I was that he gave me a Switch code, and I always love using those those Switch Online controllers that you can get from Nintendo. They're like very authentic Super Nintendo N64 NES Joy-Cons, the Genesis controllers, and I told him like I'm so excited that this game requires few enough buttons that I can play with an NES controller, because I just really get a lot of joy out of playing Switch games on a controller with like one of those controllers with like the fewest buttons possible. I think that's good game design. I think streamlined controls is good game design. So
I just started playing the new Mortal Kombat. I think it's Mortal Kombat 1, right? And I worked on Mortal Kombat 1 before it was ONE. And it was really funny because I was trying to play it and I couldn't get any of the diagonals. And I was like, what is going on? I was like, banging on my controller. I'm like, I'm so mad. Look what's happening. And I realized that I had to use the D-pad. And it was like that was game changing. As soon as I started using the D-pad, you know, it's because those games really back then, you know, were not made for analog controls.
No,
and,
no.
Right.
and so the D-pad just works better for a fighting game. Or maybe I know I'm dumb. I should have a fighting stick, but I don't. Maybe playing that Mortal Kombat's gonna like encourage me to go get I don't know what the current like. Somebody makes a fighting stick for PlayStation. I don't know, but maybe I need that. I'm not really like
The D-pad definitely what serves better with fighting games because you can do the whole tap forward and things like that real quick, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas the analog sticks have got a bit of travel, so.
Yeah, I mean, that whole scene has gotten to the point where they've developed like this controller, like has been developed that just has buttons for the directions, and people play like using this, like, you know, like the 4 or 6 buttons on the right hand side, but then there's no D-pad. It's just that all the directions are set up in a way that you can just press a button.
Yeah,
I can't even wrap my head around learning that, but I think the people that learn how to use that are very good.
Yeah, just for me, it was like just that, you know, using the D-pad, and I'm like, I haven't used the D-pad in so long, right? It was like gave me some memories because, you know, for half of my life, right, that I only had D-pads.
Yeah.
It's just these kids nowadays are so spoiled with their PlayStation 5s with 9 analog sticks and downloading a game off the internet. We had to walk in the snow to the store.
Oh yeah.
As game developers, can you imagine, you know, us making games before you could patch things? You know, you had to make sure everything worked.
I know. Well, I mean,
you know,
we always really like it. You know, Nintendo tends to be pretty good at it. But occasionally you'll get what was it, Corey? Oh yeah, like the HD 2D remake of Dragon Quest III that just came out. Even the PS5 version didn't have a day one patch. It's so rare to see that, right? And it's nice, especially when you have a physical copy. It's like, hey, like the code on the disc, like, sure, it may get a patch later, but it's like the code on the disc is like definitely not broken.
That has changed so much. I mean, you know, I remember when I worked on Battlezone and we were like talking with QA about whether the game was ready to release or not, and we just said, we'll just do a patch, and they were like angry, right? Like literally the guy stood up and was like, I'll get you fired for this. Like, this is crazy. You can't have a, you know, we don't ship buggy games as Activision in 1987, of course, or sorry, 1997. Of course they ship buggy games, but they were trying to get away from that reputation. But yeah, I mean, like all the way up through PlayStation 1, we would ship a game and that was it. And we were done. We'd, you know, move on. There was no such thing as patches for console games. And so I believe that, you know, especially through the 8 and 16-bit era, games were bug-free.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there was no such thing as games that
speedrunners
crashed.
have found the bugs, but like you were extraordinarily unlikely to run across them in the course of normal play. Like
But I mean, you look at some consoles and like, you know, like there will be like 1.01 or 1.1 versions, like they get retail releases that just they quietly fix certain bugs in them.
Look, I mean,
for the next patch,
I'll tell a story probably has never been told before, but like at Acclaim we did that a couple of times actually. Mortal Kombat on SNES, we were testing it. You know, it was like X number of days before Mortal Monday, and you know, people at Nintendo were literally working all night. They were sitting waiting for us to upload the files to them to ship it in time because it was going to sell 5 or 10 million copies or whatever. So Nintendo was breaking all the rules for us. And they tested it and said, oh, it crashes. And we said, yeah, we got to ship it now. Like there's no, we have a ad campaign, Mortal Monday. And Nintendo, I mean, it went up to CEO level, right? Like our CEO and the Nintendo CEO in Japan were on the phone and they're like, you got to ship this. And they said, okay, but you got to fix it like next week. So they shipped, you know, millions of copies of Mortal Kombat with a crash bug, like a really common crash bug. And so somewhere out there, there's 2 versions of Mortal Kombat SNES.
There's no way to tell, unless is there any markings? I wonder on the PCB or anything like that.
There's no, as far as I know. I mean, you could compare, you could do like a byte compare of the ROMs, right? And you could figure out which was
Right. Yeah.
the newer version. But it's
That's interesting.
I don't know. I
Did
mean,
it stop you?
actually,
Did
sorry.
it stop you from playing the full game? Was it completely game?
No, it was just like if you played for like 4 hours, it would crash at least once.
Oh, like a timer sort of thing.
It was just a random. It was just a random crash. Like
And if anybody
Mm.
runs into it and they keep on running into it,
But-
chances are they'll bring it back to the store and exchange it, and they'll probably get a new one. that would
I
be a
don't
new
think
version.
you'd exchange it because it was like you would just back then nobody even knew about crashes or patches or anything like that. You would just think,
Yeah.
oh,
it's
my
like,
brother
it's
must have
off
hit
that
the
fine
console
side.
or something, right? Like,
Yeah.
what would you do? You'd pull it out and blow on it,
Mhm.
right?
Good
You
thing
would
that
think-
good thing back then was obviously we had much simpler amount of data and
Right.
games in general. So can you imagine trying to ship a 2024 complexity of game with like the inability to put patches up?
Yeah. I mean, that's why it's
Well,
so
you-
amazing when it happens. You know,
Yeah.
when a
You
game
would
doesn't have a
need
day one
you'd need
patch,
6
it's not
months.
6 gigs.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, today for people watching, that day one patch is part of the development plan,
Yeah.
Right.
right? It's
Yeah.
like you know you're not going to catch everything. Even if you think you caught everything, you know you're not going to catch everything, and it's going to hit. Even the day it hits the store, you're going to get a phone call from some player who's like, "Hey, I did this, this, and this, and it crashed." You're like, "We never would have thought of that." So it's just you just have to. And I mean, Croc is single player, which makes things a lot easier. But multiplayer games, it's
Yeah.
impossible to ship a multiplayer game without
Yeah.
doing some kind of update. I mean, I'm just balancing.
And,
Oh,
and
yeah,
not
yeah.
not everyone has
I mean,
the
it's
liberty
expected.
to,
Especially for balancing.
not everyone
Yeah.
has the liberty to do what Nintendo does, where people say that they have their all these they people say they've had this game waiting in the wings for like a year.
Yeah.
Other developers need to like ship the game and make money.
Well, and by the way, that's the ideal situation for every game developer. Is like, oh, I wish we could just hold for 6 months, right? Like,
Yeah.
you want to take the final version and then start your like marketing, for example, and like, when we
Yeah.
did our trailer and people noticed that there's some things in the trailer are not done. Obviously, the game wasn't done.
Mhm.
So, I wish we could finish the game first and then have it waiting in the wings, so that we could do all the things we'd want to do to like get everybody ready,
Yeah.
and all that. But no, like you said, I mean,
And
we just need to make money, so we have to ship it as soon as it's ready.
And it's really valuable to have those hardcore fans that will notice this stuff, because sometimes they'll notice things that nobody else even thought there was a problem with. I'm like, oh geez,
Yeah.
like what is like sometimes it's very things slip through the cracks that people working on it just like don't even notice. Like, what was the River City Girls 2 that like was like there's certain objects in the
Yeah,
game that were running
well,
at 30 FPS when the game is supposed to be running at 60.
Right. Well, the game was running at 30 FPS, and I was working on the trailer for Way Forward, and like I was like literally the only person that was like asking, like, is this how it's supposed to be? And then like the game comes out, and a bunch of people are complaining about it, and they're like, because like I think I think even
Well,
the Switch version was
the
supposed
game
to
runs
run
at 60,
cap.
but certain like
Oh,
effects or like objects are
was it
ran at
the
30.
camera motion? Was it the camera motion? I think the effects were running at full frame rate, but I think the camera motion was tracking an object that was the camera tracking object was running at like 30 hertz or something like that, which is a common issue with Unity games. Yeah, and I was like, I knew about that because of John. And so yeah, I like brought that to their attention that like the camera motion was like the game was running at 30 frames, or the game was running at 60 frames per second, but the scrolling made it look like it was 30 frames per second. And it was juddery, and it's like no one working on the game knows, and they're like they came back and they're like, you're right, and it's so the
It's
game
like, how did
launched
nobody
like
notice this
that.
up until now?
Yeah,
And
the
how's
game
the
launched
game,
like
like,
that, but
coming
had to
out
have a
next week?
patch.
And look, when we worked on, say SNES, for example, everybody was testing on the same hardware, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, when you're doing a PC game, you could have a
Yeah.
player who's running on a 486 and it runs super slow, and then they might find some bug that you would never even imagine because, well, everyone on the dev team has, the latest hardware, and so there's a lot of like interesting challenges with PCs or even like Switch versus PS5, right? It's like 4 or 5 times more powerful than a Switch, and so you can have little differences in the hardware that one engineer may not even notice. There's a common thing the engineer will just say, "It works fine on my machine." So, and then that bug gets written off. Like, it's like, and people don't realize that. You get these comments online, like, "Oh, you should just test better" or whatever. It's like, well, these things are really complex.
Yeah.
Well,
And-
I'm grateful that you were so willing to let us just tear into this game. Two people that aren't all that used to dealing with PC nonsense, and it's it's doing just fine.
I'm so excited that it didn't crash. So I really like. There are obviously, until the date's done, there's known issues, there's crashes. If there weren't hundreds of bugs left, the game would have been shipped off already. So so it's always cool that there's always this joke that demos never work, right? In games, when you walk into a meeting with something and you're like, "Let me show you," and everything goes wrong.
Yeah,
So-
when it counts.
This is the exact instance when shit would usually just fall apart. So I'm just so happy. I'm watching on my other screen. I'm watching you play, and it's great that it's working fine.
Yeah.
So-
On a GTX 1080, not even RTX series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. We had a bunch of people who were like, "Hey, is this going to run on slower hardware?" And first thing I said was, "No, it's not." And because I'm just so used to that, right? It's like, now you got to have better PC. And then someone on Gary, my partner, who's on the business side, he said to me, "What about like these Intel embedded GPUs? Like every laptop has one of these things, or like the PC you buy at Best Buy has this, Intel GPU." And I'm like, "There's no way. Like those GPUs are so slow." And I looked it up online. It was like, I've got a 3070, and the Intel, the fastest Intel embedded GPU is like 1/20th the performance of my mid-range GPU. And however, that said, we asked QA to test it, and they came back and said, "Yeah, it runs fine." They're like, "We can get 30 to 60 FPS on the embedded GPU. There's a couple of settings that we added specifically for lower end devices." And I was really surprised.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is because that original PC code that we're running is highly optimized. And, console engineers from that time period were really, really good at getting every ounce of performance out of, PlayStation 1 was, I don't know how to compare it to today's, it was a really low spec machine. And so the fact that this game could run on that, and that basically that is still the main engine code that's running here.
Yeah.
So we have some proprietary tools that we've integrated, and we have a rendering engine that we've added on top. But still, most of the game that's running is still the original Croc.
Yeah.
So-
I think it's this is like a really low end Ryzen as well. Like I think it's from like
Yeah.
it's like one of the low end Ryzen models from I think 2019.
I'd really suggest you should get a better PC, but
Well-
that's your choice, of course.
Well,
It is. We both have much better PCs.
I
but
have
it's just
two
that we don't
much
wanna
better PCs. The funny
use
thing
those
is
to work on. Those
right.
are like not like
they're for
more-
work things, like the computer that's actually doing the streaming. So I'm capturing this like a console. The reason I'm just not a big PC gamer, and so I usually when I do play PC games, it's usually for a stream, and it's usually something relatively lightweight. So
Well, now we know Croc runs on pretty low end machines,
it
which is great
does,
because
yeah, because Yeah, I mean, at first I tried it on, I've upstairs. I've got, Intel 14900K, RTX 3090, and I ran on that at first because I was afraid like I might not be able to run it on this computer. It's just that this is what because I prefer to, if I'm going, I don't like to play the game on the same computer that's doing the streaming. So, that's why I have this one run through like my HDMI switching setup, just like a console. It just makes it easier for me. Cool. And so, considering I rarely play, because if I'm going to play like a modern high end game, I'm just going to play it on PS5. I don't care to deal with the PC nonsense. But if I do play a PC game, it's usually something lightweight. I just wasn't sure about this, but it's been totally fine.
Well, look, I mean, maybe down the line, people will do like they do with Doom, and they'll try to get Croc to run on, toaster, a Samsung refrigerator.
That would be the dream. Can it run Croc? Let's get.
What was? I mean, like every 6 months, I'll see some new crazy thing. Like they got Doom running on a pregnancy test. Amazon Alexa can play. Sorry, not you. Can play Doom now. It tells you what's happening in the game. So maybe that'll be Croc. Croc will run. If somehow we can get Croc running on a pair of Crocs, that would be the trick.
Can it run Croxus?
All right, so we're about wrapping up here, but I'm gonna just hit these last couple of super chats just to. Just like some general super chats that I may have missed. Not very many. There's 11 euros from H to the B.
Whoops.
Saying to the developers, the original Croc game was missing Dutch and Turkish as languages. I would love to help for translation in these languages if possible. Who can I reach for this?
Yeah, I don't think we have Dutch and Turkish on the language plan. I think once the game ships, those are the kinds of things we'll be looking at, especially for
and that could be patched in
future games, particularly. So the good news about Croc is there is almost no text in the game.
Yeah.
And so, from a localization standpoint, we're localizing the museum, the Crocopedia, and so there's some great stuff in there. But yeah, mostly it's just like level names and things. So localization hasn't been big thing for us, and we understand like for future games, if it has more text, then we're gonna like really blow out the languages that we use. But for Croc, I think we're sticking to the original languages.
All right. Quest for Glory Gamer had a $2 donation and saying Rocket Games is doing the physical release, right? And that is correct.
Yeah.
I think the Ariel has posted the link to that in the.
Yeah, we're partnered with Rocket Games. There's a regular edition for PS5 and Switch, and there is a collector's edition also for PS5 and Switch. And the collector's edition, I mean, man, that was really hard, was to pick the stuff that goes in that box because we had so many things we wanted to do, and of course it can't be $500, right? So we had to choose which things go in there. But there's some cool stuff. There's a poster. There's like a statue of Croc, which is really what you're buying the collector's edition for, is that amazing statue. And if you go to like the Rocket Games or the Argonaut Twitter, we have pictures of all the stuff that's in that box. It's a pre-order campaign, and then they'll manufacture as many get pre-ordered, and then that's it. There'll never be more manufactured. So if you want that collector's edition, I would pre-order it now. I think you have like another 2 weeks to pre-order it. And I've personally have pre-ordered 10, and they're going on eBay in 6 months.
There's only 2 more left.
I'm half joking, but no, I mean, we'll make as many get pre-ordered, right? So it's not going to sell out, but the pre-order window ends, I think, sometime in December, and then that's it. And I don't own many collector's editions, only the games that I've worked on, but I think it will be a really nice collectible, and I really do think, joking aside, I do think it will go up in value.
The most important question here is, do I get one?
No. You have to go to Rocket Games, rocketgames.com, and order one of each platform, please.
See, this is the
And
second
send your
time
proof
I've
of
had.
purchase and
I was the lead artist on Croc 1, and I had to buy my own copies.
Scott, I will happily buy you a copy of Croc 1. I just bought one myself for my collection. So I think Gary has some sealed Croc 1s, and I told him probably you shouldn't open the plastic on those.
Yeah, don't open them. Yeah.
I mean, they're not
I've
worth
some.
thousands, but they're worth a couple $100 or something sealed.
I thought
Oh,
I
yeah.
had Croc. I do not.
That's shameful. You can
I
get it
know.
on eBay.
I know. Let's see here. There was there's $3 from Indie Gotcha 2 hours ago. Sorry
Oh
about
my
that.
gosh, we fell way behind.
I told everybody in the chat that like I'm going to read everything that I can, but I don't want to interrupt anybody.
Right.
I just try to stay like topical as much as I can. Which is why sometimes I would combine two super chats together we're both asking similar things. But Indie Gotcha said, and I lost it. Saying, been trying Croc first time this month and it's making me feel like a kid again. Anything possibly new plan for Croc after this remastered release? And we I guess you guys talked about that a little bit. Like.
And we've tweeted this a bunch of times, and obviously anything like the final word is whatever we've tweeted, right? We've officially said if Croc does well, then we will be thinking hard about Croc 2. We would love nothing else, right? We would love for Croc to do really well. So please wish list, please buy the collector's edition, if you can. But the better it does, then the higher likelihood of Croc 2 and Croc 3.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So. You heard. Now you heard it.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Croc 3 is on the table.
We're gonna need your help.
Yeah. Every time we have developers on, the new thing these days is wish list, wish list, wish list.
Yeah.
We always try.
Well, it matters because like for GOG, how they can kind of tell if there's good demand, which will mean that we'll get a little more attention from them and be on the front page of GOG and all that stuff. So wish lists really are they're important nowadays. So that's why we beg people to please go ahead and just click that button, like and subscribe.
Same deal, yeah.
It is the like and subscribe of game development is those wish lists. So
I probably should have asked this one when Jez was still here, but Container 7 asked if there was any memories of trying to port FX Fighter to the Super Nintendo.
that is definitely a Jez question.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it.
So it was it was attempted.
Yeah, I was so busy working on the main game, but I do remember seeing it. I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Do you know? I mean, someone asked me, I mentioned it earlier about Croc 2 on the Saturn. Do you know if it was started even?
Croc 2? I'd left after Croc 1. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so my understanding is that it wasn't, that Saturn had basically run out of steam by then.
Yeah. Saturn died so quickly.
Yeah.
And Croc 1 did so badly on it, it was never on the table.
I see.
Yeah, that was the big issue was when I worked on Die Hard, Independence Day, and the numbers on Saturn were unfortunately, very low. I mean, the games were almost similar, or not almost. I mean, they were similar. They were almost the same on both PlayStation and Saturn, but it was just the sales just were not there.
Yeah.
So, and the other one that that people always ask us about is Dreamcast, right? And I think at some point they had started a Dreamcast port of Croc. And I say started, I think maybe it was only for a couple of weeks or whatever, and then Dreamcast unfortunately became less viable. So, so there is no secret Dreamcast port of Croc, unfortunately. At least, not yet.
Did you work on Die Hard Trilogy? Was that the one you worked on?
Yeah.
What about Die Hard Trilogy 2?
No. So that's a funny thing because I've mentioned a couple of times the other guy who's really instrumental in Croc is Gary Scheinwald, who Gary and I worked together when in the 80s, literally on NES games at Krusty's Funhouse, he was the developer and I was the publisher. And at Fox, when I was working on Die Hard Trilogy, we shared an office, and so we would just talk about games and stuff all day long. And I left after Die Hard shipped, and then he was the producer on Die Hard Trilogy 2.
Mhm.
And so I still kind of give him shit about how bad the game was compared to the first game. So I had nothing to do with it.
All the time.
I mean,
I chose Die Hard Trilogy 2.
I don't think I've
He
ever
chose the
played it,
developer.
but the name just tickles me. Die Hard Trilogy 2.
Yeah, I know. It is kind of funny, right? It's like Trilogy 2. It doesn't make any sense. But that was a great game to work on. And I know we're trying to wrap up here, but I'll just say the best part of that was that when Gary and I worked at Fox, the building that we worked in was 2121 Avenue of the Stars, which was Fox Plaza, Fox headquarters. And that is the building from Die Hard. So
the Nakatomi building?
the Nakatomi Plaza is.
Yeah.
And
Really?
And if you go there today, and if you've seen the movie,
Mhm.
the lobby it's literally the lobby from the movie, right? It is identical.
Really?
It's that building. And I'll just say, I mean, just because we were goofballs and we were all kids, basically, we're all like in our early 20s. We went in on the weekend, you had to sign in. And every single one of us would sign. It was either John McClane or Hans Gruber. Every time we'd go into the building on the weekends.
That's great.
And
I loved the first trilogy. That was awesome.
it was, I mean, a lot of like what Jez talked about, just and also really, and John, the creativity back then, because it was the first time we were doing 3D games ever. And there was just so much of like, what if we do this? And I went to London where the dev team was for a press event when the game was like 60-70% complete. And the night before, I was just sitting with the dev team. We're just, kind of shooting the shit. And I said, you drive in Die Hard 3, you drive around and run over people. And I said, well, when you run over people, something should happen. I said, maybe like blood sprays on the windshield. And then one guy goes, oh, and the wiper blades could come out and wipe the blood away. And I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. Like, we should do that. And the next morning, I wake up and I go into the office, and the guy goes, come here, I want to show you this. And they had done it. Like, overnight, they did it. And
That's
I had
amazing.
this.
They were so compelled by the idea.
But I had a panic attack because I'm like, we can't do this. Like, people, parents, and all the violence in gaming stuff that was happening around Mortal Kombat, people are gonna freak out. So the press shows up. It's every top gaming journalist in the world, right? Shows up for this event at Probe, the developer, and it was every video game magazine at the time. And so I said, hi, I'm Mike. Blah, blah, blah. I said, look, you're gonna see this thing today. I'm really sorry. Please do not write about this. We're taking it out. Tomorrow it's going to be gone. The blood, the windshield wipers. And we do the demo. Here, let me demo the game. I do the demo, and the first guy raises his hand. He goes, look, that thing with the blood on the wiper blades and everything. He goes, please do not take that out. It's just so fucking cool. And I was like, hey, what do you guys think? And everybody in the room was like, God, no, don't take it out. Like, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Really. And so we left it in, and it was, it was just part of what made that game kind of fun. Was all these little. It all happened after midnight, right? It was Simon Peck, who was this amazing engineer, would just do crazy shit because he had nothing else to do, I guess.
Probe was Fergus McGovern, right?
Yeah, sadly we lost Fergus a few years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was a great guy, and Probe was his. Was his life kind of passion. And Probe shipped a lot of games.
Yeah.
I mean, more than Argonaut. Probe just shipped games. Like, they had 5 or 6 teams just cranking games out like every 6 months.
I did a conversion of Dan Dare 3 in '89. That was one of Probe's, I believe. And we saw. Yeah, Fergus turned up to our little office. This was an office before Argonaut, and he had a Porsche, and I'd never seen a Porsche before up close. And I was like, wow.
Yeah, it upgraded to a Ferrari at some point. That was the cool thing back then. But he would come to our offices at Acclaim all the time, and it was always like, the joke was whatever you'd ask for, he would just say, sure, we can do that. Yeah, we can do whatever it is, we'll do that. And then it was always a year late or whatever. And Die Hard was such a great game, and it was because they just kept working. They just kept going. They just kept adding stuff, and we just kept telling them, we don't care how long it takes, just make it good. You know, because Fox had money, and it was like their first big game. So I think the same thing with Croc, right? It was just like, we just wanted to make great games.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's the doggy?
This is Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
I think she wants to go outside.
Me too.
She's like, can you wrap up here, please?
Yeah. That is indeed what I am intending to do here, is push us towards wrapping up. So
Yeah, this was so much fun. I really appreciate all of you guys like coming out and hanging out and talking about Croc and all these old memories, and just being open to just like any kind of question. Like it's been awesome to hear all these stories.
Get all the true Argonaut history.
Yeah.
Well, you guys should do do a Die Hard stream, and I'll come on and talk about Die Hard.
we can probably do that. You know,
We'll get the producer from Probe, or someone else like that. We've got some people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got both of them. I have two also, but I mean, like,
Yeah, we're not doing two.
yeah, I know. I appreciate that that they have gun con levels in them, which is.
That was, by the way, there's not a lot on that game I can take credit for, except for that blood on the windshield thing. But one of the things that, as a publisher, my job to feature creep games, and John will not appreciate this, was that I wanted every controller, in that game. So that game is probably the most controller support of any game out there, because it supports the mouse, it supports the gun, and I think there was an official Sony gun that it used, and it supports the NEDGCON, which is really rare. People don't even know what that is. That's the Namco.
I mean, I can play. I have one of those too.
I love the NEDGCON.
Everything with.
Yeah, that's the Namco controller for Ridge Racer.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone's watching this, if you don't know what that is, it twists for analog steering.
Oh, we did.
So that was the first analog PlayStation controller.
We did a
I
whole
remember that.
stream
Yeah.
earlier in this year where Try just played Ridge Racer Type 4 using that controller.
Yeah. So my thing was like any controller that would make the game better, we would support. So that was kind of cool. So the developer hated me for that, but it was like every couple months I'd be like, hey, how about this? They'd be like, what? No,
well, that makes me want to really play it now.
Yeah. So if you stream it, you got to get all the controllers.
Oh yeah.
So
I have them.
We can make it happen. We can make it
do
happen.
Do you have a PlayStation mouse though?
No.
No.
You're gonna have to find the mouse for Die Hard 2.
I might be able to do that.
Yeah.
But I want to thank everybody who donated and everyone who stuck around for the whole thing. And this is like, thank you again, everybody. Like, guys, it was just really a real pleasure to have you on here.
Looks like everyone watching had a great time too.
Yeah.
See you,
Thanks.
Scott.
See you
Good night,
guys.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.